Well, hello there to all the good people of Ohio and beyond. This is Aaron Knapp, and you're tuned into Unplugged, broadcasting without permission. This is a place where the truth gets louder and we dig deeper, and where we always remember be lawful, not awful. If you want the full stories, the documents, the videos, and everything they don't want you to see, head on over to Aaron Knapp, unplugged.com, my new home for every investigation, every episode, and every update. And while you're here, be sure to like the video, follow the page, and hit subscribe, and share this with someone who needs the truth. We're building something real here. We're building something fearless, and we're doing it together. Welcome to Unplugged. Let's kick this thing off.
Plug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask.
All right there. Good morning there, Lorain. Lorain, Ohio. City of Lorain. The state of Ohio, and all beyond watching. Tonight we're going to have a little message on records. And I'm doing it in the early wee hours of the morning, so I don't expect a lot of people to be here while I'm live. But you can pick this up tomorrow when you wake up in the morning or in the afternoon for your afternoon watch. But this can be a little bit of a long one as usual, but we're going to do a little bit of records discussions tonight and discuss a little bit about that video that I popped out the other day. And how we're going to talk about how this isn't a glitch. This is a culture here in Lorain City, Lorain County. And apparently in Ohio beyond, because I've helped out some people beyond our own county and other counties get records. And it seems to be that this is the culture. This is Ohio. This is the way that Ohio treats, as they call them here, sunshine law requests. In other states, their Freedom of Information Act. You often hear, a lot of the First Amendment auditors coming out talking about, I'm here to do a FOIA request. I'm here to do a Freedom of Information Act request. In our case, we're using a lot of this for the news media that we write. And that's where most of my requests are coming from. I'm not out there requesting a lot of body cam footage, although nowadays it costs a lot of money to do that. So even in the paperwork arena, I had to convince a lot of people they don't have to do copies on everything. You can literally do electronic records for most things. And now we're going to start this episode out by grounding it in something that keeps getting deliberately blurred every time officials, lawyers, or defenders of the system try to hand wave, away what's happening in Lorain and Lorain County. And as I stated, Ohio, with public records. And it's not a glitch, folks. This is not isolated mistakes. These aren't isolated mistakes. These aren't just one clerk or one person having one bad day, one overwhelmed clerk, one misunderstood email that spiraled out of control, right? We're dealing with here is a culture in Lorain. And beyond, again, because I've seen this in other counties. I've had to assist other advocates in other counties. When I requested, suddenly that I got the records that they couldn't get. Now, a culture that seems to have been quietly trained over the years that treat public records not as a right, not as a statutory obligation imposed by Ohio law, but more as an inconvenience, so to speak, to be managed, delayed, softened, negotiated, or redirected until the person asking either gives up, runs out of money, or simply runs out of energy. That distinction matters because glitches get fixed. Cultures defend themselves. A glitch is a technical problem. A culture is a behavioral issue. a glitch produces errors. A culture produces patterns. And what I'm describing here is a pattern that is now so consistent, you can predict the response language before the reply ever hits your inbox. every single time. You can predict when the word overly broad will appear. You can predict when not the keeper of the records was going to show up. Suddenly, this becomes the phrase of the month. They all seem to know it, from city to county to state. You can predict when a request that was perfectly understandable yesterday becomes ambiguous the moment it becomes inconvenient today. I know this is the culture because at this point, I'm no longer just filling my own public records requests anymore, people. Like, I'm stepping into other people's requests. I'm being copied on email chains. In some cases that I didn't ask to be copied on, in most cases I did. I'm getting forwarded screenshots from residents who are confused, frustrated, and frankly intimidated by the responses that they're getting from our city government. I'm busy explaining to people why the thing that they were just told is untrue, and why the fee that they were just quoted is not really lawful, or why the delay that they were just asked to tolerate really has no basis anywhere in the Ohio Revised Code of 149.43. I want to slow it down here, though, because this is the part that should make everyone uncomfortable, regardless of like where you fall politically or personally in this matter. In a functional system, you don't need a citizen intermediary translating the law back to its government, i.e. me. In a functional system, residents don't need a decoder ring to understand whether they're being stonewalled or not, right? And in a functional system, the burden is on the public office to know the law, follow the law, and train its staff to comply with the law, right? The Ohio Public Records Act doesn't say comply if convenient. It does not say comply and, unless the requester is persistent. And it does not say comply unless the volume feels annoying. It says records shall be promptly prepared and made available for inspection. And when you reach a point where there's a private citizen becomes a de facto public records navigator for the rest of the community, that's not activism, folks. That is system failure. It's the kind of failure that doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't come with scandal headlines on day one. It happens quietly through normalization, through either lowering your expectations to the point where whatever you get, you're just happy. And they repeat the phrases over and over. Well, that's just how it works. Well, we're allowed to do that. And until people start, stop questioning whether either of those statements is actually true, right? They just give up. And here's the part that makes this more than a clerical issue or paperwork dispute, folks, is that cultures like this do not form by accident, right? They form, I'm going to get the mandamus stuff, but they form because they are rewarded. They form because the delay works. They form because most people don't have the time, the training, or the financial ability to push back. They form because there are no immediate consequences for the non-compliance. Only theoretical ones that require litigation, right? Persistence and a tolerance for friction that most people understandably do not have. So when you hear officials frame these issues as misunderstandings or isolated miscommunications, right? Or maybe they're the result of a poorly worded request. Somebody didn't ask right. Understand what that framing is designed to do. It's designed to shrink a systematic problem into a personal one, right? They turn a statutory obligation into a tone dispute. We didn't ask right. And to make compliance feel just, discretionary rather than mandatory. What you're about to hear in this episode is not a story about one requester who would not take no for an answer. It's a story about a system that's grown so comfortable saying no when the law requires yes, and comfortable saying wait when the statute says promptly. It's a story about the culture reveals itself not through one outrageous denial, but through dozens of small, carefully worded barriers that add up to the same result, no. And then once you see that culture clearly, you can't unsee it, folks. You can do it by requesting other people's records request, or in my case, being CC'd in on the emails to watch as they do the same thing, almost verbatim, word for word. I used to think it was just me, but it's not. It's everyone. They're programmed to respond like a-holes. And then how they're supposed to work and how they actually work are two different things here in Ohio, and at least in Lorain. Ohio public records law is not complicated, right? That point needs to be stated plainly before anyone tries to bury this discussion under jargon or legal theater, right? It's not obscure. It's not novel. It's not unsettled. 149.43 has existed in one form or another for decades. It's been interpreted repeatedly by Ohio courts and being reinforced again and again by the Supreme Court, right? The statute defines public records broadly and intentionally so. Now, they do chip away at a lot, and they have been much more lately. But because the legislature is understood something, it's something very basic. If you let government carve exceptions by convenience, transparency begins to collapse. Now, under RC 149.43, if a record is kept by a public office and it documents the organization, functions, policies, decisions, procedures, operations, or other activities of that office, it is a public record unless a specific, narrowly construed exemption applies. Not a generalized concern, not a discomfort, not an embarrassment, a specific statutory exemption, right? Now, emails are not special. Emails are not fragile. Emails do not get a separate rule book because they happen to be digital or politically inconvenient. Ohio courts have been crystal clear on this point. An email does not stop a public record from because it lives on Outlook or instead of a filing cabinet. The law also could not be clear about timing. Records must be promptly prepared and made available for inspection during regular business hours. Now, promptly's been defined in a lot of ways, right? But it doesn't mean eventually. It doesn't mean after the law department is finished debating optics. It doesn't mean, once everyone involved has been given time to brace for impact. Ohio courts have consistently rejected the idea that public offices get to define what prompt is. However, they feel in the moment, and they try, promptness is measured against the nature of the request, the volume of records, and the actual work required, right? Not against the comfort level of the people holding the record. Doesn't matter whether you like what the email says. All that matters is you have a certain amount of time and it's timely to get it out. Inspection also has a meaning, and that's where things in Lorain and Lorain County start to get a little off the rails, right? They get a little cuckoo. Inspection means inspection. It means the requester has the right to see the records during regular business hours. It doesn't mean come back later. It doesn't mean we'll email you when we feel like it. It doesn't mean we're still reviewing them internally. The right to inspect exists independently of the right to receive copies separately. The distinction matters, and it's one the Ohio Supreme Court has recognized repeatedly. Inspection is not a favor, even though I asked for it as one. It is not it is definitely a statutory right. And yet, what keeps happening here follows the same script over and over and over again. A resident submits a request, weeks go by, sometimes months. Eventually, after silence or vague acknowledgments, person shows up in person, i.e. me, to exercise the most basic fucking right the statute provides, right? I'm like, oh my God, thank you so much, Lorain, for honoring the most basic of tenets that the statute provides. Following the most basic of law. Wait, you didn't even do that, you sons of bitches. Anyway, they show up in person and the right to inspect, we try to assert it. And that's when the line gets delivered, often casually, sometimes apologetically, but always unlawfully. You can't inspect them because we haven't, been redacted yet. That's what they said to me. That sentence should stop any competent lawyer cold, right? Because embedded inside that sentence is an admission of everything the statute requires. Let that sink in. And this was two lawyers standing in front of me like jackasses. It's an admission that the records exist. It's an admission that the records are responsive. And it's an admission that the office has possession and controls them. And it's an admission that the only reason that they're not being produced is because the records or the office has not finished its own internal process. Not because of an exemption, not because of a legal prohibition, but because the office has not gotten around to doing what the law already requires it to do. Ohio law doesn't allow for that. There's no exemption for unfinished redactions. There's no pause button built on RC 149.43. There's no statutory language anywhere that says the public office may withhold records indefinitely while it prepares them to its own satisfaction Redaction is not a duty. I mean, redaction is a duty, but it's not a delay mechanism. The obligation to redact exempt materials does not suspend the obligation to provide non-exempt materials. Courts have been explicit on this. Public offices must redact and release. Catch and release, redact and release. Not redact eventually, not redact when convenient, redact and release, redact and release, redact and release. An office could lawfully withhold the records simply by claiming that redactions were not complete. The Ohio Public Records Act would be meaningless. Any office that wanted to avoid disclosure would just keep on doing that, right? Just keep them in a perpetual state of review. We're still looking. We're still looking. More important, we're still looking. Every request can be stalled indefinitely under the guise of internal processing. That's precisely why the statute doesn't permit it, right? Like, it's precisely why the courts have rejected it whenever they have been tested. And it's going to get tested again by me and these two jackass lawyers. Like, the reason the excuse keeps getting used here is because it's, not because it's valid. It's because most people don't know enough to challenge it. I do. Most people hear something that sounds legal. Oh, well, Mr. Knapp, we would be bereft in our duties if we failed to redact these documents before letting you. Blah, 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 blah. Like I said on site. All I want to hear from you is, here are your records. Here are your records. Here are your fucking records, Mr. Knapp. Most people hear the word redaction, they assume it carries some kind of automatic authority. It doesn't. They don't realize that what they're being told is not lawful denial, but an unlawful delay dressed up in professionalism and bullshit. This is how culture replaces compliance, not with dramatic refusals, but with soft obstruction, polite language. Mr. Knapp. Well, Mr. Knapp. Well, Mr. Knapp. Well, with explanations that sound reasonable until you actually read the statutes, right? Once that culture takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. Just like our truths are self-evident, those become self-reinforcing. Staff repeat what they've been taught. Lawyers defend what's become routine. Residents are left believing this is just how public records work, when in reality, it's exactly how they are not supposed to work, ever, at all. But whatever. I mean, just take the classes. You guys would know. And people keep ending up in my inbox, folks. Like, I didn't just wake up one morning and decide I wanted to be the person everyone forwards their public records problems to. That's not a career aspiration of mine. It's not a brand strategy. It's not, some self-appointed role I went looking for. I didn't want to be king of the records or records requests even, because sometimes it's not even records I want. It's something that happens when a system becomes so unreliable, so internally inconsistent, and so resistant to basic accountability that people start looking for anyone who understands how to push back without getting steamrolled or talked in circles until they give up. That's this guy, I guess. And that's fine. People forward me emails because they're being ignored for weeks at a time. And when they're told, as if the delay were normal, that the office is still working on it, they forward me the email and I get involved. They're being quoted per page fees for records that could be provided electronically that do not exist on paper or whatever. And they're going to create paper copies. They forward me emails because, they were told to come in person, and they were told, well, I don't know, anybody's been told to come inspect them in person, but, I know that I took time off to come in and inspect them in person, and it was not actually possible because the records were not redacted yet. And I've heard stories of other people not getting their records at all. They forward me emails because offices suddenly can't figure out who the custodian is. That happens in Lorain all the time. These guys don't know who the custodian, even though the request was sent to the very department that created the records in the first place. They forward me emails because everyone keeps saying legal review like it's a magic phrase that suspends statutory obligations simply by being spoken out loud. And here's the part that matters most, the part that makes this bigger than any single dispute, right? These are the same people. These are the same, these are the same people that are running a shared strategy or copying each other's language, right? Like, that's what's going on here. Turn the slide off. It's a weird light over here. Yeah, that's better. They're copying one another. They're interpreting the same phrase, same delays, same evasions, same posture of quiet resistance disguised as professionalism. And when different people with different backgrounds, different motivations, and different levels of persistence all report the same experience, you're no longer dealing with coincidence. You're dealing with pattern. Patterns are how culture reveals itself. Now, I know this because a lot of people have taken to blind carbon copying me on a lot of their records requests. So I'm there even though people don't realize it. And by people, I mean the clerks that are in charge of all of this, which is why sometimes a lead crew would be like, oh, interesting to see you here, Mr. Knapp. Like, I didn't see you before. No, you didn't. And sometimes you people won't. Because apparently I'm the boogeyman that leaks in, that sleeps in the BCCs. But I see what you're doing. I see how you're denying them exactly how you deny me. And it's everyone. It's people from like news people to just regular citizens trying to get a report from the front desk somewhere. They're just, it's ingrained in them. No. Deny, delay, hope they die. It's not a coincidence, folks. We're dealing with patterns here, and patterns are how culture reveals itself. I know this because that was one of my areas of study. Now, when a cultural problem looks like in practice is this. It doesn't require a memo that says deny requests. It doesn't require a conspiracy meeting. It only requires enough people inside an institution to learn implicitly that delay carries zero consequence. Deflection is safer than disclosure, and most requesters will eventually just stop asking if you make the process frustrating enough. Once that lesson's absorbed, it gets repeated without anyone even having to consciously think about it. The new staff learn it from the old staff. Lawyers defend it because it becomes routine. Administrators treat it as somehow normal workflow rather than statutory noncompliance, which it is. So people start asking, well, why are so many of these emails, why are so many of these emails end up in my inbox, right? Well, the answer is uncomfortable but simple. They end up there because the system they are supposed to rely on is not working. They end up there because the law on the books is not being reflected in the behavior they are encountering in the employees or the government that's supposed to serve them. They end up in my inbox because at some point they realize that what they're being told does not line up with what they're reading. And they need someone to confirm that they're not fucking crazy. Who better to call than the guy that used to be a therapist? I am not diagnosing them because I can't diagnose crazy, but I can sure as hell document it. That's what we used to always say. Look, they see me going through the same thing. We all end up at the same point. And that's the greatest signal of them all, is when enough people independently reach the same conclusion that the problem is not them, but the process. You're no longer talking about a few bad interactions, right? You're talking about a culture that has normalized noncompliance to the point that citizens now rely on each other to navigate what government's legally required to do in the first place. And they are. They're not only required to do it, but they're required to help you do it. That's what irks me the most, is they're supposed to help. I tell them all the time, oh, this isn't the right department. Well, the law says you're supposed to assist me find the right department, not blow me off. And that's what they do, right? Now, before we go any further, I'm going to stop talking about this in the abstract, right? Because at some point, analysis without demonstration starts to feel a little unreal. I want you to hear I want you to hear this moment exactly as it happened. Because this is the point where everything I've been describing stops being theoretical and becomes an actual audible video. I apologize that the video itself, it moves up and down on my shoulder. My live video wasn't working at the time. It was muted, but I caught it on my body cam. So you don't see them the whole time, but you hear them clearly. You hear me, you hear them. And what you're about to hear is not a heated exchange. It's not shouting, although I do sound loud because it's right next to my face. And I always sound loud, but it's not chaos. It's calm conversation about public records obligations. I'm asking direct questions. I'm listening to the answers. No one's being insulted in the beginning. No one is being interrupted. I don't know. I kind of felt like I interrupted some people, but it's just me speaking to my city law department about statutory duties. I want you to listen carefully because the language choice, not the volume, not the emotion, the words. Listen for when the posture shifts. Listen for when the frame changes. Listen for when the moment when this stops being about explaining the law and starts being about control. Now, to be clear, I'm not a client in this conversation. I'm not in court. There's no judge. There's no docket. It's not litigation. This is a citizen, me, speaking to my government servants, asking them to explain why the law department, the law department, you, the law department, the law department are not complying with the law. Okay, keep that in mind as we move into this video clip. Okay, now, I'm gonna play the video clip. I'm gonna step away from the video here, and I'm gonna play it so you can clearly see it.
Good afternoon.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Knapp.
How's it going?
Not too bad. How about yourself?
I'm all right. How about you?
I'm Scott Bowles. This is Joe Pritchard. As you can probably assume, we're with the law department.
Huh?
So what's up?
Just want to inspect the emails that I've been asking for Mary's for months.
You're trying to inspect the records in person?
Yeah.
All right. As you know, you do have the right to inspect the records in person. However, we still have to fulfill our obligations. That means we have to make sure that we're not disclosing any material that's not a public record.
So none of that should be in a public email being sent to the public or in public servers, right? If you're sending something that's redactable, it should be on an encrypted server. It should be encrypted in the server. None of those emails should be anything that's redactable. If I can get all of Chief McCann's emails, and Fallon sent me every last one of them unredacted, I can have the ones about me on Mary unredacted. So I don't know what game we're playing here. It doesn't take 8 months to redact them. So what's the problem?
Mr. Knapp, as you know, we do have various different reasons to not provide records, to redact records. For example, if there's uncharged suspects, we don't provide that information.
Why would there be uncharged suspects inside of a council person's email?
Mr. Knapp, I'm just giving you an example.
I don't need I know. Look, I understand the way this law works. I know you're supposed to provide the records and you haven't provided them. You have to provide them. You have to let me inspect them. I'm here to inspect them. Are you denying me inspection? Yes or no? It's a simple yes or no question.
What I'm telling you is we are not going to allow you to look at records that have not been properly redacted.
Okay, well then you should get them ready because I've asked for them for months. You've had a more than enough reasonable amount of time to comply with my request. And you haven't done it. You've driven me to drive down here multiple times, giving you multiple warnings. You act like I'm just showing up here out of the blue for the first time mentioning it. Come on, let's not be stupid here. We both know I've been asking since, 8 months ago? It doesn't take that long to redact anything. You're full of it. So would you like to answer my question again? Are you going to let me see him, yes or no?
Today, I can tell you very clearly that we in the law department have not had a chance to fully.
That sounds like a you problem, not a me problem. The law states that I can come see him today. I want to see him.
What I can tell you is we're not going to let you see.
I don't care what you can tell me. And then I'll just sit here all day until you give them to me. I'll go sit in the front. I'll video everyone coming in and tell them how you're denying me my public records. If you did this with McCann and McCann screwed me and you guys participated in that in the law department. And now, no, don't Mr. Knapp me. I'm speaking. You work for me, not the other way around. Smile all you want. You do. You don't speak to people that way. Yeah, I can do it however I want because you work for us. You're government servants.
Can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You just asked me, you can't speak to me that way.
You're right.
What did I say to offend you?
What did you say to offend me?
Correct.
I don't want it. Your excuses. I'm sick of your excuses. This is all I get from you guys. Oh, we're not gonna. And then I have to take you to court and pay money to do it again and again and again. I've given you months. to comply with this. This is not something, I'm not asking for all of your guys' emails that I'm still waiting on from you, right? I'm asking for the one set that I asked for at the beginning of the summer. That's not unreasonable. I don't know anyone out there that would think what I'm asking is unreasonable. I think that just like with McCann's emails, you're trying to hide stuff from me. And if you want me to believe you, why would I? Mr. Levesque lied to me for over a year and a half. So why would I believe you guys?
As I have told you, the law department has not had the opportunity to fully inspect and redact appropriately the records that you're
Sounds like a you problem. So if you're not going to provide the records today, then you're admitting you're going to break the law because the Ohio Revised Code requires that you let me inspect them when I'm on site.
It does not, what the Ohio Revised Code does not provide is to
Anything you've been working on, so you've been working on it at all? You've done nothing.
I'm not going to answer that question.
Exactly. See, that's the thing. I can have them in rollouts. I can see whatever you've worked on so far. So you've had it for 8 months. You haven't just done one email. One.
I don't know what the status of the review is.
So then why are you even talking to me if you don't know what the status is? You're sitting here telling me you don't even know what the status is, but you're telling me that you know they're not done. What do you know?
The status of the law, Mr. Knapp.
Which is I get to inspect them when I show up.
Correct. However,
They
they also have to be appropriately redacted before you.
there should be nothing to redact in a government email. Otherwise, you would have redacted all McCann's emails, and he was an uncharged suspect. Yeah, I know.
I did not participate in that process.
I know you didn't.
So,
Because I actually got the records. That's how I know you didn't participate in that process. Because all you guys do is deny. Deny, 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 deny. Somebody shows up, says, hey, give me the records. By law, Attorney General requires you to give me the records, lets me inspect them. Doesn't see anything in there about whether you've properly redacted them yet or not. Does it? Anywhere in that law that you're talking about?
what it does provide is for redaction.
Mm-hmm.
There are other provisions in the Ohio Revised Code.
Do tell.
I believe it's chapter 149 that do
149G.
specific other issues
Mm-hmm.
regarding failure to properly redact.
Mm-hmm. You mean like you guys been doing?
Going above and beyond that, there are other areas of the law in which
I mean,
disclosure of information is not appropriate.
So you guys are willing to give me other people's socials, but you're not willing to let me look at actual emails. I do you a solid. I call you guys up and I give you the information that you're screwing up and giving me cops information and all that. And you can't even do me a solid and provide me some of the emails you've worked on? You realize how shitty that is?
Mr. Knapp, what I can tell you is you keep using the pronoun you for you guys.
Yeah, you.
I am not the only attorney in the office.
You're the only one I'm talking to. You can discuss pronouns all you want. You, all of you are the law department. Right now, you are my city government, and you are denying me my records that the law says I get to have.
What I'm telling you, Mr. Knapp,
Is I can't have my records.
if we were to allow you to view unredacted records, we would not be doing our obligation.
You already let me view unredacted records when you sent them to me before with the assistant safety service director's file and James McCann's file. And how many other files do you send me that have unredacted crap? And now suddenly you care about redactions and a bunch of emails that I have all these other emails from you guys that are unredacted. I don't get redacted emails from city emails.
Mr. Knapp, I'm happy to continue this conversation with you, but once again, I'm going to push back on the use
Pushback.
the word you.
I don't really care what you're going to do. It doesn't matter to me. You don't push back on shit with me. I'm not your client. I'm not under any law or duress. I'm a citizen of these United States of America, and I'm not going to be corrected by some child who's going to sit here and tell me how to speak.
I'm just trying.
No, you're not. You're trying to tell me how to talk, and you don't get to do that.
Mr. Knapp.
No, you're not. No, you're not. You're being an ass. You've said the same thing 37 times. I told you, you just told me you're going to break the law, then you're going to break the law. You're not going to give me the records, right?
What I'm telling you is we have an obligation to redact the record.
And you should have already done that. You have an obligation to do it in a timely manner, too. 8 months is not timely.
What I can tell you
Is that you didn't follow the law. The law says timely. So you're going to follow this part, but not that part. Got it. Only part of the law matters.
Only once in a while it matters. Only when we deem it matters in the law department. Because we got 4 doctorates and we can't even figure out exactly what state laws are.
Mr.
You don't even know what 9.68 is. I mean, Jesus Christ. Who am I even dealing with?
Mr. Knapp, due to the ongoing litigation regarding 9.68, I cannot speak to you about that issue.
I didn't ask you to speak to me about it, did I? I don't expect you to say anything right now. You've already said what you're going to say. You're not going to give me my records, and I'm going to stay here until I get them. So guess we're at an impasse. You can go back to doing whatever nothing you were doing before, I guess. Go redact some records, and then maybe bring them to me because I'll be here waiting. Live on Facebook.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, as you know, Mr.
No. Bye. 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 I didn't need you to talk. Just bye. You don't have my records. I don't want to talk to you. Rouse. Dismissed. Buy a shirt that fits.
All right. Well, that is our, hold on. That's our video of the day. Me dealing with the law department of Lorain. Rouse is what I say to my dog when I want her to go away. Rouse. They send down the junior law department to talk to me. And all these guys got is a bunch of no's. And they broke the law. They may not believe they did, but they did. The law doesn't allow for them to say no then. In that moment, when I'm there and I've given them time, there's no no's. Those two, well, at least one of them broke the law. I get why he was, pivoting on the word you. It made him feel powerful. But since he introduced himself as the law department multiple times, you get associated as you. These kids, man, like that's why I was like, are you seriously pronouncing me right now? What are you, like 12? But, here we are that right there, that's the moment. Not the swear word right at the end there, but, not the tone, the moment. You heard it. I'm going to have to push back on that term you. That's not neutral language. It's not explanatory language. It's an adversarial language. It doesn't belong in a conversation like, when you heard me respond back under my breath, kind of like, push back. Like, that wasn't confusion. That was recognition, because push back assumes there's a hierarchy there. It assumes that the speaker has some authority to correct my framing, which he does not. It assumes that that was a negotiation, which it wasn't. A debate, a contest, a positioning. It was none of those things. I came into the clerk's office to get records, and I got 2 lawyers. And that's why I said it plainly. I'm not your client. We're not in court. You're not my government. You're my government. That sentence matters because it draws a hard line around these roles. Public lawyers do not stop being public servants when they step out of the courtroom. They do not get to switch into an adversarial mode just because the citizen is asking uncomfortable questions or using pronouns they don't like. Jesus Christ. I mean, and it wasn't even the appropriate, argument for pronouns. It wasn't like I was mislabeling him as a, I didn't call him a she when he's a he, or a he when he's a she. It literally was just using the word you as in you, the law department, because he represented himself as the law department. But hey, I got you. They're still speaking as the government. And when I said, I don't give a shit if you want to push back, that wasn't anger, right? That's clarity. I'm rejecting in that moment. The idea that compliance with the law is something that gets negotiated through my tone or my framing. The law doesn't care about, your rhetorical discomfort. It doesn't give a shit. The statute doesn't pause because someone doesn't like how a question is phrased. That moment tells you more about why public records keep breaking down here than the citation, any citation you look up in any law book ever could. Because the same mindset that produces the instinctive pushback in person is the same mindset that produces delay, deflection, and procedural games in the email. It's the same jackasses. Same mindset treats transparency as a position to defend instead of a duty to perform. You know, I wonder if they do that in the marital bedroom too. You know, it's a duty to perform, bro. Don't just stand up and go, look, it happens to a lot of guys. Once you hear that posture clearly, you start to recognize it. It's everywhere else that you look. And that's when you realize it's not a glitch. It's the culture, folks. That's the culture. That's the culture in Lorain City, folks. You're not going to get your records. They're going to delay, deny, and pray that you die. That's right, folks. Pray you die. The moment in that video that matters more than any statute now is I want to talk about, hey, come on, Scratch Name McScratcherson. Jules. Come on, lay down. Jules. Jules. It finally becomes visible, right? Not inferred, not speculated, visible. The whole psychology of it all is, you know, you don't have to take my word for it. You can actually hear how the system thinks when it's confronted directly with its own obligations. It does have an obligation to provide the records, and it didn't. What's happening in that video is not debate about policy, right? It's not a philosophical disagreement. It's not a clash of personalities or a war of the minds. We were having a conversation about obligations, not opinions, not hypotheticals, not my feelings, his feelings, our feelings, your feelings, you feelings. Obligations imposed by the fucking law, right? Statutory duties that exist under 149.43, especially Section G. Whether anyone in that room liked it or not, they were required to give me the fucking emails, and they didn't. I start out, I'm calm in the conversation, deliberately so. I'm precise with my language. I'm not raising my voice. I'm not insulting. I'm not interrupting as much as possible. I'm not grandstanding. I'm not doing, I'm doing exactly what citizens are constantly told to do if they want to be taken seriously by the government, right? I'm asking direct questions and listening to their answers. But again, I only required a yes or a fucking no. That was it. Then in the middle of that calm, ordinary exchange, here's one of these city lawyers saying, I'm going to have to push back on the term you. Like, really, dude? Come on. That sentence matters more than almost anything else in the entire episode because that word push back, it doesn't belong in that conversation. Push back is not neutral language. Pushback is adversarial language, right? When we use that language, that's what it is. That's why when you let lawyers be public servants, they don't do a very good job of it. He's not in customer service. His job is to try to win, defend, defeat. Pushback is litigation language. It's litigious. Pushback assumes that there are sides, and there's not. Pushback assumes that someone stepped out of bounds and needs to be corrected, and I didn't. Pushback assumes a hierarchy where the speaker has some authority to reframe that discussion on their terms, and they don't. That's why you hear it instantly in my voice when I'm like, pushback. Like, it reminds me of the part in Waterboy where he says to the, visualize an attack, right? And he's standing there and he goes, no! And he's like, no, what? And then, boom, hits him and, knocks him out, right? Like that was the shock of that pushback. Like, pushback? Like, what? Not because I didn't understand what he said, because I recognized what had just happened and the tone this child was taking with me. And I call him a child because he had to be 20 years younger than me. If I dated someone 20 some odd years younger than me, you guys get all mad at me. Make up your minds. But I recognize that something had just happened. That posture shifted, right? The mask slipped. The conversation stopped being about explaining their obligations and started being about controlling the frame, right? I said it plainly. It's moments like that that require clarity, not politeness. I'm not your client. We're not in a court. You are my government. It's not rhetorical. It's corrective. Draws a hard line around the roles that should never even have been blurred to begin with. I'm not there asking them for their fucking legal advice. I'm not there looking for representation. I am not there to be managed as an opposing party. We are not in court. There was no judge, no docket, no adversarial proceeding. Just one citizen with 2 lawyers asking his government why they are not complying with the fucking law. That's it. Why can't you follow the law? Attorney General says it clearly. Everything I've read says it clearly. You cannot say no when I show up. And you did. You broke the law. 2 lawyers. And then I said the part, that you're going to keep replaying, which is I don't give a shit if you push back, right? Because that line's going to get clipped, replayed, isolated, might even get misunderstood. So let me be very clear about what it was and what it was not. It wasn't anger. It wasn't a loss of control. It was not disrespect for the office. That was clarity. What I was rejecting in that moment was not a disagreement. It was the assumption embedded in the phrase pushback. That compliance with the law is something to be negotiated through my tone or his framing or rhetorical discomfort. The statute does not care if a lawyer dislikes the word you. The law does not pause because someone feels mischaracterized. Oh, my feelings hurt. It's so hard being you, Muffin. Obligations do not evaporate because a public office prefers a different narrative, right? The moment tells you clearly, more about why public records keep breaking down in Lorain and Lorain County than any statute citation ever will. Because the same mindset is instinctively reaches this adversarial language in a non-adversarial setting is the mindset that produces that delay, deflection, and obstruction everywhere else that we look. It's the mindset that treats transparency as a position to defend instead of a duty to perform, right? Hey, what's up, Itchy? Once you hear that posture clearly, once you listen to them, and that's on my YouTube, by the way, if you guys want to listen to it again and again, I do. In denials, it's not yet redacted. I'm not the keeper of the records. The endless referrals, the circular responses, we're not the keeper, we're not the keeper, we're not the keeper. Well, who is the keeper? Well, I don't know. Oh, we're sending it to the law department for review. Oh, the law department's like, we're not the keeper. Well, they sent it to you for review. We got to wait till we send it back to them. It all comes from the same place, right? That moment in the video is not about a word. It's about power. It's about who they believe gets to frame the conversation and who they believe is supposed to accept that framing. Once you see that clearly, everything else will start to make sense, folks. They're assholes and they want to be assholes. And I get it. I'm an asshole too. But there's, as I told the cops once on my porch, before I move into this next section, I'll give you a little funny story. I had a cop, I think it was Ferenzi, and a sergeant on my front porch. And Ferenzi was being an asshole. And it was all over, my neighbor behind me had accused me of brandishing a firearm, even though I hadn't. And I didn't have my cameras going at the time. I paid for the service now. Back then I didn't. So I stood up to spin around to show him, I had no weapon or whatever. And he's being a total jerk. And he's like, well, that doesn't mean you didn't have it on you then. And listen, all I want to say is this. I said, I was showing you because you showed concern and I wanted to dispel your concern and not give you a reason to do anything more. That being said, you can leave my porch now. Because, there's only room for one asshole on this porch and in this orbit, and that asshole on this porch is going to be me. And I told the sergeant he could stay so we could have a good conversation. And this has happened before. I don't get that choice in public usually, but on my own front porch, yeah, you're not going to roll up on my own front porch and talk shit. But, I think the reason the word you made him uncomfortable in that moment only makes sense if you pay close attention to how he introduced himself, right? When he came in, he and his partner, they chose to speak for the entire, he chose to speak for the entire law department, right? And the conversation up to that point, he didn't introduce himself as an individual lawyer offering a personal view, right? He introduced himself by name. Hey, I'm, blah, blah, blah. And then immediately anchored that with the name to the institution, right? We are the law department. We are the law department, right? Hi, I'm so-and-so. Hi, I'm Bill's mother, brother Bill. He wasn't just John Smith or whoever was in that room. He was the law department. He was the law department. That was the frame he selected when he entered the room. That was the authority he invoked, not me. He spoke it in a collective voice, as if deliberately and consistently. We do this. We interpret this way. The law department handles it like that. Our position is, our understanding is. This was not the accidental language of a man that walked in the room not knowing what he was saying. This was the assertion of a man who was speaking on behalf of an institution, folks. And that's the framing that matters, because when you speak as the institution, you accept the institutional obligations that come from that fucking role. You do not get to selectively toggle it on and off between being the law department and just being some guy in a room on which version feels more comfortable at that moment when I'm talking to you. For the entire conversation, there was no discomfort with abstraction. There was no objection to collective language. There was no concern about tone when the law department was asserting its interpretation, its process, or its discretion. The discomfort only showed up when that same institutional identity was suddenly reflected back on him through the magic fucking word you. Not his name, right? I didn't say his name. I didn't say a personal insult, not a raised voice, just you. Used in the exact same institutional sense he had already adopted for himself. That's where the mask slips, because suddenly you was framed as inappropriate. Suddenly it was something to correct, right? Suddenly it was something that required a pushback. And that reaction tells you far more than anything said explicitly in that conversation. This is not about manners. It's not about civility. And it damn sure wasn't about professionalism. This was about accountability of aversion, right? The word you only becomes uncomfortable when responsibility is being assigned to something, right? If I said, hey, you did a great job. Hey, you were fantastic. Hey, last night in bed, woo, you were amazing. Hey, you give good massages. Hey, you make lots of money. Hey, you are amazing. No, right? You is good when it's positive. Second, you start saying you're bad. You guys did it wrong. Maybe you guys shouldn't have done that. That becomes a problem, right? The minute you assign it and it stops being neutral. Comfortable standing behind the law. You is accurate if you're comfortable with what you're doing. If you're confident that your office is complying with its statutory duties, you doesn't feel threatening, right? It doesn't feel personal. It doesn't need correction. But if the moment of responsibility is mirrored back at you, right? The minute you got to look at yourself in that mirror, you recoil to reframe, to object to the pronoun instead of addressing the substance. I feel like that's not even a pronoun, but I mean, I guess you. I mean, nobody goes around saying I go by the pronoun you. I don't think they use everything else in the book. Z, them, zay, zai, zoo, zed, zo, whatever. But in the obligation, right? It's not in the language, it's in the obligation of this word. And that's the core insight that people need to understand, because it explains far more than just one exchange, right? You don't get to be the institution when defending delay and then retreat into individuality when accountability appears for the institution. You know, that's the problem. You don't get to wrap yourself in the authority of the law department to justify interpretations, practices, and refusals, right? And then suddenly insist on a personal distance when those same practices get questioned. You don't get to wear the badge of institutional power and then shed its weight the second that institutional responsibility gets a little heavy for you. When a law department lawyer speaks as the law department, you is not disrespectful. It's not informal. It's not accusatory. It's legally accurate. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not assign duties to personalities. It does not assign duties to vibes. It does not assign duties to conversational preferences or internal discomfort levels. It assigns duties to public office, duties to prepare records, duties to make them available, duties to do so promptly, duties that exist regardless of whether compliance feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or politically risky. So when I said you, I was not personalizing you, the lawyer sitting across from me, in a personal way or the conversation. I was institutionalizing it, right? It's holding the law department to the exact role it had already claimed for itself. And that fact made him uncomfortable, right? It's not a flaw in my language. It's the evidence of the culture I'm describing, a culture that's perfectly comfortable speaking with authority, but deeply uneasy when the authority is tethered to any sort of fucking obligation, right? God forbid we get held accountable. It's not a slip of the tongue. It's not misunderstanding. That's a tell. That bullshit about ongoing I wasn't talking about the ongoing litigation. I just said 9.68. Suddenly he knew what 9.68 was. If you don't know what 9.68, go look up ORC 9.68 in the Ohio Revised Code. Check it out. I didn't think they knew what it was. Apparently they do. Surprise, surprise. The real tell, though, was not what he said. It's what he assumed. The most revealing part of that exchange was not the specific sentence about pushing back, right? It was the assumption underneath it. The assumption that he had the authority to correct my language. The assumption that he could redefine the terms of the conversation midstream, right? My age, we don't stop midstream. The assumption that even outside the court, even outside of an attorney-client relationship, even when speaking as a public servant, he still controlled the frame. I'm sorry, but you sent a child to do a man's job, but that assumption did not come from arrogance in the personal sense. It came from institutional habit. Came from a system that's grown way too accustomed to being deferred to rather than questioned. That's the big issue here. They got so used to being referred to and deferred to as, their royal fucking highnesses. They really did become the royal we, and they expect us to kiss their royal we asses. The assumption's been the same once you see repeated over and over and over again in Lorain and Lorain County. When it comes to these public records, it's the quiet belief that the government sets the pace, the tone, the boundaries. Even when the statute says otherwise, the belief that compliance is discretionary, timelines are flexible, that clarity is optional, and that the public will just ultimately adjust to the expectations downwardly to match the government's comfort level and not the law. That belief isn't written anywhere. It's just trained invisibly. It's reinforced, and it becomes muscle memory for all of these guys. You see it in all the emails because they say the same thing. We're still reviewing without any citation law, without any explanation of what review actually means. You see it in phrases like we're determining applicability, as if applicability is the internal preference rather than the statutory analysis that must be articulated and justified. Because fear not, must be an articulated and justified statutory analysis to go with it. You see it in denials that cite case names but never explain how the cases actually apply to the request at hand. You see it in responses that quote patients instead of the law, tone instead of statute, process instead of obligation. You see it in the strategic use of friction, right? They'll throw up fee demands that appear only after the requester persists. Requests don't come in person for records that are plainly electronic. Invitations to inspect that dissolve the moment someone shows up. Redaction delays that function as holding patterns rather than compliance tools. None of these are tactics on their own. They don't really, I suppose, look dramatic. And that's the point. They're not meant to explode onto the page. They're meant to exhaust you slowly and just chip away at your willpower to the point where you just don't give a shit. They're meant to slow that person on the other side down enough that continuing no longer feels worth it to them, right? It's not chaos, it's choreography. Diffuse responsibilities so no one personally owns the delay, right? Oh, you don't want them anymore? Well, that's because you asked them to jump through 37,000 hoops that they weren't even supposed to jump through. Route everything through legal review so no one has to get a straight answer, right? Reassert control through the language, through the procedure, through the posture, And above all, maintain the assumption that the requester is still asking for permission rather than exercising a right. That's key. You are not asking for permission. You are exercising your fucking rights. And a right not exercised is a right that you don't get to use for very long. That's for sure. That's why a reaction to being told plainly and accurately, you're not following the law is so telling. The flinch is not because the statement's aggressive. It's not because it's disrespectful. It's only because it collapses the entire performance that they were doing. It removes the fog. It strips away the procedural padding and names the problem directly. Once named, it cannot be managed through delay or reframing. They broke the law by telling me no. 2 lawyers sat in front of me and broke the fucking law. Go look it up. Find a way out of it. Tell me where they had a reasonable cause to delay or deny me seeing those records. They broke the fucking law. Once named, it can't be managed. The system doesn't recoil because it's being attacked. It recoils because it's being accurately described. That's the real tell, folks. Not the words spoken in that room, but the reflex to reclaim control when accountability enters the conversation, right? I'm there. I want the records. They know they have to give them to me. The reflex is to correct my language, you, instead of addressing substance, right? The reflex is to police my tone instead of complying with the law. And I asked them, hey, you couldn't have gotten one thing redacted or looked through, a few things looked through in the hour or two I sat there? No, they couldn't. Those reflexes don't come from one lawyer on one day, right? They come from a culture that spent years metastasizing without any meaningful consequence, right? And when that culture finally encounters someone who does not defer, does not soften their language, and doesn't accept delay as a substitute for compliance, the reaction is not engagement. It's not discomfort, because clarity is dangerous to systems that depend on ambiguity to survive, folks. Sunlight fucking burns, baby. And that's why this matters beyond this conversation and beyond, when denial of inspection becomes the violation, right? That's what happened when I was denied the ability to inspect the records in person. It was not a misunderstanding or a rescheduling issue, right? It was a violation of Ohio Revised Code. Full stop. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not make inspection contingent on completion of redactions. Let's just say that again. It was a violation of Ohio law. 2 lawyers, full stop. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not make inspection contingent on completion of redactions. Again, Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not make inspection contingent upon completion of the redactions. It does not allow a public office to hold records hostage when it finishes an internal process or while it finishes it. The duty is to promptly prepare the records and make them available for inspection during regular business hours, period. That's it. Inspection is the baseline. Inspection is the baseline. Inspection is the baseline, right? Redaction is the office's responsibility, not the requester's burden, and not a lawful reason to refuse inspection altogether. When an office tells someone you can't inspect these yet because they haven't been redacted, it's admitting several things at once. It's admitting the records exist, it's admitting the records are responsive, and it's admitting that the office has possession and control. And it's admitting that their only thing standing between the public and access is the office's own delay. That's a question he admittedly wouldn't answer. And that's precisely why this scenario of the statute is designed to prevent. If unfinished redactions were a valid excuse to delay or deny inspection, any office could indefinitely delay access simply by never finishing. The right would just be illusionary, right? The statute would be optional. That's what the law does not allow. It just doesn't. This matters because inspection is not a courtesy. It's not discretionary. It's not subject to a negotiation between me and 2 fucking lawyers. I just want to point out they sent 2 lawyers, and they always have at least 2 lawyers in the room. Every time I go to any sort of a thing with records in the public, county level, I got Solo and Lee Prue. At city level, I got Zaleski and one of these yaks. It's the mechanism by which the government verifies that the government is telling the truth, right? These inspections. about what it's withholding and why. When inspection is denied, transparency collapses into trust me, and trust me is not the law. That's why I got a little pissy about that whole, I'm not going to trust you shit. But that's why the word you hit a nerve, an old boy. Layer that legal violation back onto the moment of the video, right? The discomfort with the word you makes a lot more sense when you understand what you was actually doing in that conversation. You was attaching responsibility, not abstractly, not theoretically, practically. It was associating the speaker, a relative new lawyer in the law department, with actions already taken by that department. Actions that included denying inspection in person in a way that the law does not permit. And for most of that conversation, we spoke comfortably as the institution, right? He did. We do this. The law department does that. Our interpretation is. That institutional identity was useful when he was explaining delays, right? It was useful when he was justifying his practice. But the moment that institutional identity was mirrored back, the word you stopped being comfortable for him. Because now you did not mean a general entity floating above responsibility. It meant continuity. It meant inheritance. It means that as a representative of the law department, he was now associated with those decisions that were legally vulnerable. The psychological pivot, you was not personal. It was institutional accountability made grammatically unavoidable for him. And that's what needed to be corrected. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it was accurate in a way that closed his escape hatch. 2 lawyers, 1 resident, right? 2 lawyers, 1. All right. And what that signals. That's another detail that does not need to be glossed over. They sent 2 to deal with me asking about public records. That's not efficiency. How much do they get paid an hour? God almighty. That is about signaling authority, right? They send 2 lawyers. It's reinforcing the hierarchy. It's about reminding the person, me, on the other out of that table that they're outnumbered by credentials, right? Even when the law itself is straightforward. And a healthy system of public records issue does not require a show of force, although that wasn't really a show of force. It requires compliance. When an office responds to a statutory right by escalating personnel instead of producing records, it tells you something about how the office perceives the interaction, not as a service to me, the public, but as an not as an obligation to me, the public, but as a challenge to be managed, a challenge to their authority. And again, this is not about individual personalities. It's about institutional reflex. Why this matters beyond this whole one conversation is I'm not doing this episode because of one lawyer. I'm not doing it because of one office, right? I'm doing it because the culture does not correct itself. It calcifies. It metastasizes. It spreads. It's cancerous. It trains new people. It normalizes delay. It reframes obligation as discretion. And eventually you reach a point where a resident asking for emails about themselves is treated like a problem instead of a right holder. Why can't I have the emails? What's so damning in a bunch of emails that have my name in them? What would need to be redacted? What did you say? Jesus. That just makes me think they're horrid even beyond belief, because the McCann ones were bad. You wouldn't acknowledge those. You acknowledge these and just don't want to give them over. That's how inspection becomes privilege instead of a guarantee. That's how redaction becomes a shield instead of a duty. And that's how lawyers forget they work for the public and start talking like the public works for them, or worse yet, like the public is a defendant across the aisle to be cross-examined. Happens slowly, happens politely, happens through Mr. Naps and Mr. Naps, happens behind little phrases like, I'm going to have to push back on that, and legal review, and we're still working on it. But the result's always going to be the same. The law recedes, control advances. It's the same thing. It's like that whole Seshash thing the other day with the lake, right? The lake's, pulled back, opened up a bunch of stuff for you to see. It's all the way back. Right? That's just it. Like, the law recedes and the control takes over. But hey, you know what? I'm not going to apologize for saying you to him. I wasn't talking to him, the boy. I was talking to my government. And my government does not doesn't get to push back on accountability. Not in Lorain, not in Lorain County, Not anywhere. It makes some people uncomfortable. Well, good. Fuck off. Because discomfort's the beginning of correction. Silence is how it got so bad in the first place, right? Discomfort is good. It's okay to be discomforted. It's okay to have a little discomfort, right? We've gotten way too comfortable, folks. We all know what comfort breeds. But, that's going to bring us to the end of the first part of the first hour of the podcast. I guess the last part's not as long, but we're going to talk about the county and the last part. But we're going to close up here and do a little ad. We're going to conclude the city side of things. So from the McCann emails to the Springowski emails, when denial becomes a pattern, it's not an excuse, folks. So before we move on to the county, it's necessary to kind of stitch together what the city keeps insisting are unrelated incidences and show why they're not. Standing alone, each delay, each denial, or each deflection can be framed as an administrative hiccup. And there's a lot of them, right? I have way more than just these two key ones, but it would take us all night to get through them all. And I know you don't have that kind of time. Hell, I don't have that kind of time. The McCann emails were not an anomaly. They were a warning flare, right? They're what's happening right now with the Mary Springowski emails. All the emails that I had to send 13 individual requests to the law department to, which are following this set of emails. I've narrowed them down for them. I've done everything I can to give them every, easy way out. And now they're just saying, basically, we got to redact and we got to redact. I'm giving no's on solid requests that have to be answered. I mean, again, I'm sorry they don't like it, but they were required by law to provide them that day. They can call the AG and confirm. They broke the law, 2 lawyers. It's happening now. Will keep happening to you, to me, to everyone. But hey, the McCann emails, they matter because they represent a clean, verifiable break between what the city said was true. Several people, from the mayor to the safety service director to lawyer Levesque, the law department, everyone said, including Captain Morris, then Lieutenant Morris, then Sergeant Morris, said that the emails did not fucking exist, that I was crazy, that I was reading it wrong, that I had received all the possible responsive emails that I possibly could get. And I kept never relenting, saying that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. Because I had a little bit. I just had a taste from the county and have it all. Everyone denied they existed until suddenly they didn't. So yeah, when I say they're liars, they're fucking liars. I don't care why you're a liar, you still lied. Those denials were categorical. They weren't hedged, they weren't not qualified, right? They were not framed as ongoing searches across multiple responses from multiple offices. The city took the same position. No such emails existed. And that statement was a lie. It was false. No candor. I possess the emails now. They existed. Not only that, they were bad. They were retained. They were circulated. They were directly contradict the city's repeated assertions that they didn't exist. Once that happens, the issue is no longer about workload, staffing, redaction, or legal review. The Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not permit a public office to deny the existence of records it possesses. There's no exemption for embarrassment. There's no discretion to pretend something never happened. You wrote it, it happened. When a public office denies existence and then that denial is disproven, the credibility of every subsequent denial is necessarily compromised. That's why I don't believe them. You can't walk in the office and tell me I'm supposed to believe you. That's the lens through which Mary Springowski emails have to be viewed now. What we are seeing now with those requests, not a new playbook. It's the same one, just slightly refined. First comes delay. Then comes confusion about custodianship. Then comes narrowing demands that exceed what the statute requires. Then comes language about more ambiguity and volume or interpretation. It's all wrapped in the same neat little package, the same underlying assumption. If the city stretches this shit out long enough, the requester will either give up, lose the thread, or, hear me out, there's only a 1-year statute of limitation on somebody claiming defamation per se. It's not, if the tolling period doesn't extend like it did with McCann in a tort case, right? For defamation per se, just publishing bad things about people in an email, especially a government email, 1 year from the date that the issue occurred. They stretch it out long enough, the requester will lose their right to sue. That might be what they're afraid of. McCann emails expose the city's internal narrative management does not always align with reality, right? And once that happens, patterns matter more than promises. Their promises don't mean shit anymore. Because when the city now says it has no responsive emails involving a sitting councilwoman or claims uncertainty about searchability or frames keyword requests as overly broad after they've been brought and clarified down to Boolean terms, the question is no longer about that explanation as theoretically possible. The question is whether it is credible in light of what we already know. Is it more likely than not true that they're liars and they're probably hiding it? Based on what we know? Yeah. Credibility is earned through conduct, right? Ohio law is explicit about inspection. Records must be promptly prepared and made available for inspection during regular business hours. Inspection does not hinge on the completion of redactions. Redaction is a duty that runs alongside disclosure, not a justification for withholding it entirely. When the city tells a requester to appear in person or inspect the records or refuses to let them inspect the records, denies inspection because internal processing is incomplete, it's not exercising discretion. It's violating the statute. I've been waiting for months and they couldn't, they haven't done one. I couldn't even get them to, if they could have offered something up to quiet me in that moment, they would have. That violation becomes more serious when it's paired with a history of denying the existence of records that later surface. Yeah, that's a problem, because that's why the interaction with city law department lawyers mattered in context, right? When one of them objected to my use of the word "you," what was really happening was not about tone or professionalism. It was about association. He had introduced himself as the law department. He spoke in the collective, right? The royal we. He claimed institutional authority. But when the conversation turned to accountability, who's denying me right now? Who's saying no? You. Not the law department. Not this lawyer sitting next to you. Not the big guy upstairs, right? You. Mr. Bowles, you denied me. That's why they sent you, bro. You don't even realize you were the lamb to the sacrifice? This has happened so many times with me. You get a reputation after a while. When I was dealing with my daughter's custody case, I had a reputation with the local sheriff's department. And they used to send the rookies out to deal with me so that, I would beat them up and train them on how to speak to somebody appropriately. And I see it here. You send Bowles down to talk to me, and you knew he was going to get chewed up, but you had him admit to breaking the law. So Bowles, you're the only one that said no. Nobody else said no. Brianna said, hey, let me call upstairs. Law department comes down. Law department comes in and says, hey, I asked, not the other lawyer. No, Bowles. Bowles, you said no. No is what you said. And you claimed institutional responsibility and authority. So you broke the law. That's what made you uncomfortable when that word attached to you as a newer lawyer to the accumulated conduct of the law department that you were speaking for, as well as the accommodated conduct you were conducting right then and there by denying me. That discomfort's telling, because you could have gone up and got me the emails. You could say, fuck it, I know the law. I'm not going to break the law. I don't care what you guys said. I did that once. I get it. That's how you lose a job. I told the county I wasn't going to, give up my ethical code. So they threw me on top of the fucking volcano and sacrificed me to James McCann. Bet you wish you hadn't fucking done that now, huh? Imagine a world where that never happened. I'm still working with juveniles in the damn juvenile justice center doing my job, but instead I'm out here making fucking podcasts because of McCann. But hey, whatever. Hey, don't forget. Wait. You can scan that right there and donate to the cause to keep free news alive. The word "you" threatened attached to him. He didn't like that. And the city does not get to disaggregate responsibility after the fact, right? Ohio Revised Code assigns duties to the public office. When the attorney speaks on behalf of the law department, they inherit both the authority and the baggage of that institution. Sending two lawyers to address one citizen asking to inspect records does not change that dynamic. It just reinforces it, and it signals that the city understands the stakes, and it's choosing defense over correction and following the law. And that's why I'm no longer accepting the city's explanations at face value. Not because I assume bad faith by default, but because the city's already demonstrated that it will deny the existence when existence actually is inconvenient. Once that line's crossed, skepticism is no longer cynicism, right? It's rational evaluation based on the evidence. The Mary Springowski emails appear to be following the same arc as the McCann emails: delay, denial, deflection, procedural fatigue. And until the city breaks that pattern with transparent, prompt, statute-compliant disclosure, its assurances mean jack shit. I mean, I shouldn't have to receive 10 no's to get one yes. And that's what it is. I shouldn't have to litigate reality into existence, and I should not have to function as an intermediary for other residents just to explain the law and what it means and what it says to the fucking government that's supposed to already know it. Half the time wrote it. That's why the city portion of this story ends here. Not because the issue is resolved, because the record's clear. The city has generated a volume of denials and runaround that cannot be explained away as coincidence. The McCann emails prove that. The Springowski emails reinforce it. That's why accountability has moved out of the administrative channels and into the federal court. I'm suing them. And the city made that choice through its own conduct. They begged me to sue. I got the emails where McCann and others said, sue us, sue us, sue us, sue us, sue us, sue us, sue us. Well, eventually, you assume someone either wants you to sue them or they're calling for their date saying, sue, sue, sue. So I'm saying sue us, sue us, sue us. Eventually, if I don't sue them, I'm just a yak who never follows through and does what he says he's going to do. So you tell me to sue you enough and I'm going to sue you. City made its choice. Now we're going to move on to the county and start that process. Before we do, we're going to have a word from our sponsors so I can grab a water bottle because I'm getting a little wet. Hey there, folks. If you really want to know what's happening in your hometown, the place to go is Lorain Daily and Vermilion Daily. From city council and school boards to local businesses, community events, and neighborhood stories, these outlets cover what the big media ignores. This is hyper-local news for real people in real communities. Visit Lorain Daily and VermilionDaily.com today. Read it, share it, support local journalism because your community deserves coverage that actually lives here. If you own a business and you want to reach customers right here in Lorain County and Vermilion, this is your opportunity, folks. Advertising space is now available in Lorain Daily, Vermilion Daily, and DNC Radio. That means your business can reach local readers, local listeners, and a highly engaged community audience. And here's a bonus. For a small add-on fee, your business will also be advertised once per episode on my podcast, Unplugged with Aaron Knapp, as long as your ad remains active on one of those two platforms. This is web exposure plus podcast exposure in one package. If you're interested in advertising, contact me now to reserve your spot through Facebook, email, or reach out directly. Ad space is limited and local visibility matters, folks. Oh. All right, folks, we're back. Sorry about that. Got to pay the bills, even though those are all free. Now it brings us to the county. I fought with the county and won. I fought with the county and lost. But bottom line is the county follows the same pattern, the same playbook as the city does. Although I'm not going to have some fancy video to play in the middle of it and a focused pattern. I'm just going to talk about the denials, the process, and how it plays out. But when the county does it, they call it process, right? Because if anyone's listening still believes what happened at the city level was a one-off or a personality issue or a bad stretch of staffing, right? The county will disabuse you of that idea real quick. Now, what the county has perfected is not outright refusal, right? The county has perfected is something a little more insidious. They call it process, and they use it in a way that a locked door used to be used, right? As a way to stop you without ever having to say no. Everything the county does is reasonable or sounds reasonable on its face. Everything's polite, everything's carefully worded, everything's wrapped in professionalism and procedure. You send a request, you get a response almost immediately. Hey, we've received your request, Mr. Knapp. We've forwarded it to the appropriate department. We are gathering responsive records. For the record, we forward it to the appropriate department means the circular file, i.e. the garbage can. No, I'm just kidding. If you didn't know the law, you'd walk away thinking that progress was being made on your records, right? If you do know the law, though, you recognize the pattern immediately. Like, oh, holding pattern, nothing actually has happened yet. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not require acknowledgement of emails, right? It does not require routing updates. It does not require status notifications. It requires that records be promptly prepared and made available for inspection or copied at cost. Promptly is not a courtesy, right? It's a legal standard. It's a reassurance, is not compliance. It's a theater. It's where the county differs from the city in style, but not in outcome. The city tends to stumble into denials, and then they just double down, right? They're like, oh shit, no, and no, right? Not the county. The county keeps you moving just enough to feel like that it feels rude to accuse them of saying that they're obstructing you, right? They never really say they're refusing. Oh, you know what? Look, we're working on it. They never say they can't comply. They say they're coordinating. They never say no. They just say, you have to wait a little longer. It's CLEIRs until our investigation is done. Our investigation is not done yet. We're still in the process of processing the records. We're still trying to locate them. We're trying to locate the appropriate departments. They don't say they can't comply. Nothing, right? No outright no's. They just make yes take fucking forever. And then the fees. They're the worst about it because I had to train these assholes. Fees are where the county's version of process reveals its teeth, right? Suddenly records that are electronic somehow get generated per page like charges. Suddenly inspections framed as burdensome. Suddenly you're told staff maybe billable. Retrieval costs are significant, or the volume changes everything. None of this is how the statute works. Ohio law is a public office to charge the actual cost of copying, not the cost of thinking about copying, not the legal cost of legal review, not the cost of being annoyed that someone asked you to do your job. Actual cost. And for electronics, you know what that cost is, folks? You guessed it, that's a big fat fucking zero. $0 and 0 fucking cents. But the fee conversion, is a little off for them. It's not about the money, right? It's about the leverage. It's about testing how serious you are. It's about creating just enough friction that a reasonable person decides it's not worth the hassle. One of mine, it was like $109 in fucking copy fees. And then I was like, I want them in the format they're held in electronic format. And then suddenly I broke them down to $5 for a thumb drive because I kept saying, why can't you just give them to me on a thumb drive? Digital. So then what they do is they tell you, well, we can give them to you on a digital thumb drive, but it has to be our thumb drive. We have to provide it because you can't provide it because you might be trying to hack our systems. For the record, their systems suck ass. I'm glad that the city and the county are both upgrading their IT because they've gotten our records stolen quite a few times. But I'm not taking it. It's about creating just enough friction that a reasonable person decides it's not worth the hassle, right? The county knows that most of the people do not have time, energy, or the legal literacy to push back on it. Push back. I feel like that's Pee-wee's magic word of the night. So they let the process do the dirty work, right? And if you do push back, right, and you start citing the statute, you start referencing case law, and you start documenting timelines, the tone shifts. It's still polite, still professional, but a little bit tighter, a little more careful, a little more defensive. Requests get split. Maybe custodians get a little shuffled. Responsibility diffuses across departments. So no one single person seems empowered to say, yeah, here are all the records, right? The process becomes obstruction without even looking like obstruction. Just like with the city, though, the most important thing is to understand is that this is not accidental. Patterns do not repeat themselves this consistently by chance, right? The county has trained itself to manage requests rather than fulfill them, to slow walk everything rather than deny it, to outlast rather than comply. And when someone refuses to play along, someone insists on the actual statute instead of the performance of compliance, the system reveals how fragile it really is. Because the law is not ambiguous. Ohio Revised Code 149.43, especially Section G, does not say when, do your best, right? It doesn't say, hey, when it's convenient. It doesn't say after internal coordination. Motherfuckers, it says promptly. County's definition of promptly has quietly drifted far from the statute that it now means after you make enough noise. And that's not process. That's conditioning. And as we move deeper into the county side of this story, you're going to hear this, not one bad interaction or one misunderstood request or one unfortunate delay. You're going to give the same muscle memory again and again and again and again, just like the city. Acknowledgement without action. We're working on it. Movement without progress. We're redacting it. Courtesy without compliance. We understand it's frustrating. A system that relies on exhaustion to enforce silence. We're working on it. That's what the county calls process, folks. They're working on it. And that fee game, man, they got that fee game. They had it down good for a while, right? They was trying to fee game and price people right out of their rights in damn Lorain County. And that's how it worked for a while. Because there's an additional layer to the county's game, right? The city realized early on, like, they could do things digitally. I've even educated the Lorain police and all these people. They all provide thumb drives now, right? It's easier for everyone, them and us. They don't have to print out a shit ton of records. You don't have to give you a bunch of paper. They just give you a little thumb drive. You pay $6 for it. Everyone's happy. Before I ever started pushing back, before I ever started citing chapter and verse, before I ever started documenting patterns, many of those agencies, they defaulted to paper. Boxes of paper, stacks of paper, per page copying fees that justified nothing more than habit, right? $109 for a bunch of records. Fucking ridiculous. You better be double-siding that shit. But the records were created electronically. They were stored electronically. They were searched electronically and emailed electronically. And then suddenly, it's as if we lived in a fucking filing cabinet in 1987 from the moment someone asked to see them, right? That didn't change on its own. It changed because I forced the fucking issue. Repeatedly. I get it. I am an outsider. I came here from California. Shit. All right, we're going to stop for a second. I'm just going to say this. The town I moved to in Podunk fucking City, Idaho, like the most 5,000 people in the town, right? 5,000 people. We were the county fucking seat. And while I was working on my daughter's custody case as a pro se litigant, they shifted from all paperwork to electronic filing at the courts. Now, this was painful for them. We're going through this process now at the Lorain courts. I watched as lawyers and clerks struggle. Now, mind you, again, I was on my military disability at this time too. So I'm going to junior college, but fighting this court battle. And I come from California, where I lived right next door to Yahoo at one point. I grew up on computers. Yeah, it was 1987, but I grew up on Commodores and Apple IIs. So I have an understanding of how these things worked. And I was frustrated when I got to Idaho at how archaic the paper system was. They were still using fax machines. And I was like, ew, who uses those? But apparently technology goes from West Coast to East Coast. And so I get to Idaho and they're still using all this stuff paper. So when they switched to electronic filing, I was so in love with it. It was the same court system that the Ohio Supreme Court here uses for their public records request, which is I-Court.
And iCourt is an amazing system. And I understand that our own county's been fighting over we should have iCourt or this other system. Well, it should be iCourt. It's the same system that the state uses, but apparently somebody's related to a system in our county government and they want to use a different system. That being said, it frustrated me and it frustrated the lawyers that lived in Idaho at the time to have to switch systems. Now, fast forward to Ohio. I get here, and the first thing I had to do was correct Judge Glass's court because her clerks did not file an out-of-state order, which I did. I was in her court as a pro se litigant in my own custody case fighting during COVID. I eventually won full custody of my daughter, half full custody of my daughter. But here they were using paper again. And it, again, frustrated having to go back to paper or fax machines or hand carrying documents in is just ridiculous to have to hand carry stuff in. So when it came to these records requests, I looked at the records requests as my chance to attack the lack of technology in this area, which was, if it's provided electronically, I'll give you the thumb drive. We're going to fix this problem. Eventually, all these agencies that I was requesting from all started buying thumb drives, and they went from offering me paper to thumb drives. Recently, I got another one where they offered me like it was $109. I was like, you can't offer it to me in electronic. And usually they say they can't send it to me, but you could easily upload it to a big file and I could download it, which some agencies do too now. So I don't have to pay the money for the thumb drive, but they want to make it difficult. That's the whole point. So when they tell you, no matter what, they can't argue their way around that. If they tell you it's gonna be like $100 in copying fees because you want a ton of records, tell them put it on a thumb drive, pay the $5, $6, and call it a day. Ohio records law does not let the office convert records into a more expensive format just to justify a fee. If they're stored electronically, they're to be produced electronically. Full stop, not printed, not copied, not scanned back in, produced as they exist. Over time, I trained these offices to stop killing trees and start using thumb drives. Start killing other parts of our environment with silica and all that. But hey, flash drives, digital delivery, not as a courtesy, but because the law requires it. Once that shift happened, something important was exposed. The fees were never about cost. They were about leverage, right? Costs too much money. One of the most consistent county tactics is to weaponize price. Not aggressively, not blatantly, just enough to make people hesitate. Just enough to make a resident think twice, right? Suddenly, digital records come with a per-page charges. Suddenly, there's a mysterious flash drive fee, or that bears no relationship to actual cost. Suddenly, labor is mentioned, or even though Ohio law doesn't explicitly allow that, public office cannot charge that employee time spent searching for, retrieving, reviewing, or redacting records. Here's the tell. When you push back, when you cite statute, when you calmly explain the electronic records must be provided electronically and that labor is not billable, the numbers change. Quietly, magically, $100 estimate becomes $10, then $5, then nothing but the cost of the thumb drive. Sometimes even that disappears, right? No apology, no acknowledgement, just here you fucking go. Just a revised answer that the original demand, like as if it never existed, right? That alone tells you everything you need to know. If the fees were lawful, it would not be negotiable. Lawful fees do not evaporate under scrutiny. The fact that they do that proves that they were never about cost recovery. It was about deterrence. It was about seeing whether the person asking really knew enough to resist, right? About pricing people out of their rights before they ever even realized those rights existed. It's not hypothetical, folks. I watched it fucking happen again and again and again. And I've seen it happen being CC'd on other records requests. I'm like, they can't do that. I mean, I'm sure most of the records people have figured out why it sounds like half these people sound like me. Well, they're just going to send me the request and I'm just going to answer it for them. Ask why. They're told it's policy. Then they cite the law. Suddenly it's $5 for a flash drive. County behaves as if it's done something generous for you too, right? Rather than they were corrected and they were doing something unlawful to begin with. That's not compliance, right? That's extraction. It's a quiet way, a quiet use of money to control access. And it only works because people don't know that the law's on their side, right? They hear a price tag, they assume it must be legitimate, they back away, they self-censor, they decide
Transparency is too fucking expensive. And that's why this matters so much, because once the cost becomes the gatekeeper, public records stop being a right and start being a luxury. You know, I thought that was done. I recently requested some civil cases in regards to one of my friends. And they were like asking me $109. And I'm just going to say, man, dude, you got a lot of cases civil. But I was shocked that it was still being asked. You know, as soon as I mentioned digital, oh yeah, okay, we can give it to you digital. The county knows this. The county relies on this. And the only reason the tactics weakened over time is because someone keeps forcing the issue until the fiction collapsed. The law didn't change, the behavior did. And that tells you exactly where the problem was all along. It was with them. And that's why I had to correct it. And if I'm not so necessary, then why did that have to be me correcting it? I'm not making them do extra. I'm making them follow the law. That'd be like telling someone, well, I pulled them over because they were going 80 in a 25, and you'd be like, well, you know, like it was going a little extra. No, bro, like they was going way extra. Like that's the law. If the law says don't do it, you don't do it. If the law says do it, you do it. The law didn't change, the behavior did. That tells you exactly where it was all along, right? Then they roll into this, we don't have access to that file right now bullshit. When CLEIRs stops applying and they start transferring, you know, why that transfer kills that excuse, right? There's a critical legal point that almost never gets explained to the public, and that's one the county routinely benefits from people not understanding, is that CLEIRs, confidential law enforcement investigatory records, right, CLEIR small s, do not exist in perpetuity, right? They don't just live forever in that state. They're not a permanent cloak. Their purpose is conditional, time-bound, and purpose-specific. Once the condition disappears, so does the exemption. Under Ohio law, CLEIRs protection is tied to an active investigatory purpose. The exemption exists to prevent specific harms: interference with an ongoing investigation, disclosure of confidential investigatory techniques, identification of uncharged suspects, endangerment of witnesses. It doesn't exist to protect embarrassment or shield agencies from scrutiny of after the fact. And it absolutely does not survive unchanged once an investigation ends or is transferred, right? It doesn't. That's where the county's language becomes especially misleading, because records will be described as investigatory long after the investigation's concluded. Video will be withheld long after enforcement decisions have been made. Emails will be treated as untouchable even after referrals are complete. And unless someone knows to ask the next question after that, the exemption quietly fossilizes into a permanent denial. But the law doesn't allow that. Because once that investigation is closed, the justification for withholding evaporates. Once a matter is referred to another agency, the original custodian no longer gets to pretend the record's frozen in some sort of investigatory amber to be opened up during the next Jurassic Park movie. The mere fact that a record once touched an investigation doesn't mean it's forever exempt. That's not how CLEIRs works. That's not how Ohio courts have interpreted it. And that's not what the statute says. And this is especially important when we're talking about like video and other objective materials. Video does not become more sensitive with age. It becomes less. Once enforcement decisions are made, once charges are filed or declined, once the matter is resolved administratively or referred elsewhere, that's key. The public interest in disclosure increases. It doesn't decrease. The original harm CLEIRs was meant to prevent is no longer present. Here's that part that exposes the sleight of hand. Because when records are transferred to a new agency, my understanding of the way this works is the exemption analysis must be reassessed. A record that was temporarily withheld by one office does not remain automatically exempt simply because it changed hands. The receiving agency must independently justify any continued withholding under the statute. Often they cannot, which is why video and other materials suddenly become releasable, right? Once they move outside the original office that first invoked CLEIRs.
That alone tells you something important. If the record can be released by the receiving agency without harm, then the original withholding was never about protection. It was about control, about timing, about managing exposure. That's why the investigation is ongoing has become such a powerful phrase. It sounds definitive, sounds final, but it's only meaningful if it's true, and only relevant while it remains true. Once the investigation ends, once it's transferred, once investigatory purposes exhausted, CLEIRs phase, it does not linger, it does not haunt the record forever, it expires. And yet the county rarely volunteers that fact. Requesters are not told when investigations close. They are not notified when referrals occur. They are not informed that a previously withheld record may now be available. Silence becomes the enforcement mechanism. And if you don't ask again, nothing changes. If you don't know to ask again, you'll never find out. And that's not transparency. That's strategic inertia keeping you from getting the records. The law places the burden on the government to justify withholding, not on the people. At the time of the request, too. It does not place the burden on the citizen to guess which exemption might quietly expire when agencies continue to rely on CLEIRs after its legal foundation is dissolved. Like, they're not exercising discretion, right? They're misapplying the law. And they have been. I'll tell you why later, but that misapplication has consequences. It turns a narrow exemption into a culture of permanent secrecy. It trains staff in the prosecutor's office like Eric Zamba or Monica Pluta or, any of those individuals that I've dealt with. It trains, Michelle Becco. It trains, our court clerk, our clerk of counsel, Brianna Dole. It trains people to treat investigatory language as a universal shield. It conditions the public to accept that delay as normal. And it ensures that the only most persistent, informed, and relentless requesters ever see what they're entitled to see. This guy. And that's what makes me the asshole, right? He, as one said once, no, he's a troublemaker. They need to know. That's not how public records law is supposed to function, right? CLEIRs is a scalpel. And the county keeps using it like a fucking hammer or wall. And I don't know. So when one office complies and another one hides behind CLEIRs, that's where the entire CLEIRs narrative finally collapses under its own weight. Because now I have a clean documented comparison that exposes what really happened. And it's supposed to happen, right? So when it comes to the county, I'm always requesting, I'm always dealing with all these different agencies, county, city. When I get redactions, I can show you, they're just so fucking redacted. It's not even funny. And so then I go and I see that the Chronicle got leaked some information that there was a special prosecutor being asked for, but they didn't say why or who. So I asked the sheriff and the prosecutor's office records request, said, hey, can I have this stuff on JD Thomas? Or it wasn't JD, it was on this special investigator. And they said, no, it's private, it's CLEIRs. It's CLEIRs. Okay. Well, but they both stated they'd sent it to the attorney general. And then I guess the attorney general had sent it to the Ottawa County prosecutor. So I sent it to those two. Then I sent it to the attorney general, and then I sent it to the Ottawa County prosecutor. So Hall and Silva's office responded with they couldn't give me anything. It was CLEIRs. It was still CLEIRs. It was ongoing. The AG's office gave me everything. They gave me Hall's report. They gave me JD's. They gave me a Silla's stuff and request. The emails involved with it. Everything laid out. The only thing that was subtracted were two names. And you could figure out who those two names were. It was Battistelli and Thomason. And those were the names in that report. Those were the names that were blacked out. One a witness, one supposedly an uncharged suspect. Just the names. That's it. Nothing else. When you get something from the county now, or from Janice Gura, or from especially from Lee Prue, like it looks like an old secret, top secret report or ultra secret report from the military, not something you're supposed to get from your government that's supposed to only have, names of certain things redacted and certain identifying information redacted, and that's it. Everything else is public. So when I got that file from the Attorney General, the JD investigation, right? Not hypothetically, not rhetorically, I asked them and I received them. The documents were produced with minimal redactions, exactly like the law requires. Names, narrow personal identifiers were protected, but the substance of the investigation was disclosed. The public interest was honored. The statutory balance was respected. And at the same time, the Lorain County Prosecutor's Office and Lorain County Sheriff's Office were still saying, no, fuck you, these are private. These are CLEIRs, right? Overlapping records under the banner of CLEIRs. It's not legal. It's not the difference of legal interpretation. That's contradiction. The Attorney General can release the investigatory records with lawful targeted redactions, then the claim that those same records are categorically exempt collapses. CLEIRs does not mean no one ever sees this. It means we protect specific interests while the investigation's active. Once the Attorney General had completed the investigation and sent it on to the Ottawa guy to review, and technically there was no investigation if Tony sent it to them to review, but any of completed the investigation and produced the records, right? They gave them to me. The investigatory purpose has been exhausted. There's no more reason to hide them. The exemption had faded. The law had moved on. Yet locally, here in the county, at the prosecutor's office and the sheriff's office, they think the Attorney General's full of shit. They actually wrote that they disagreed with his opinion. Well, then write that shit, motherfuckers. You write the Attorney General. Your buddies with him. Write him up and tell him, hey, we disagree. That we think you broke the fucking law. Fucking dicks. Yeah, but locally, that denial language didn't change, right? They kept talking that shit out the side of their neck. They still haven't given it to me, even though I got everything from the Attorney General, including the shit that they would give me. And they still won't give it to me. They're still invoking it as if nothing's happened. As if another constitutional office had not already demonstrated that disclosure was not only possible, but actually required by law. It's not caution, folks. It's obstruction by inertia. That's why copying the press suddenly makes records move. Say the quiet part out loud because too many people have experienced it to be coincidence. Records move faster when the press is copied. Fees shrink when attorneys are copied. Delays evaporate when Attorney General's office is copied. The fact should alarm anyone who still believes this is about workload or staffing or confusion or the amount of requests. What it is compliance should not depend on who is watching, right? The law doesn't say produce records properly unless no one important is looking. The statute doesn't contain a visibility clause. Rights don't turn on audience size, and yet the pattern's unmistakable. The more eyes you bring into the room, the more cooperative the process becomes. That tells you something essential, folks. The resistance was never about capacity. It's always been about control. When requests are quiet, they stall. When they become visible, they move. When they are isolated, they're delayed. When they are copied widely, suddenly the same records are no longer hard to find. The same redactions are no longer that complex. The same fees are no longer no longer that necessary, right? That's not how a lawful, healthy system behaves. That's how a discretionary system that's sick behaves. A system that decides when to comply based on exposure risk rather than legal obligation. That's why people started copying me, guys. Not because I have a special authority, not because I'm a gatekeeper, because I visibly change because visibility will change their behavior, right? People have learned empirically that if they add witnesses, it alters the outcome. I taught them that telling the story in advance prevented the stall. The sunlight worked, right? Not as a metaphor, but not as a mechanical pressure, right? Or not as a metaphor, but as that mechanical pressure that pushed down. I mean, again, I've got it on my damn website. I produced a whole little book on this with paperwork and everything. I charged a minimal amount for it. I don't even care. I told people I'd give it away free. Sunlight works, folks. You got to expose these people. That's it. Expose them. And that's what the most damning fact of all is. When compliance requires amplification, the system's already broken. I mean, imagine you're a news agency and you're asking something from a county or a city agency, and they're just blowing you the fuck off, right? Every day, every week, no response. And suddenly they go, well, you know what? I'm just going to involve Aaron. And suddenly the records show up. Same thing with me. Like, I'm being BCC'd, I show up, suddenly the records show up. I'm involved in a few cases like that. Right now, I'm waiting to see if my boy James is going to get his records or not, or other people are going to get their records or not. They're all out there requesting records. I'm CC'd or BCC'd in a lot of them. And I'm just watching. Because I want to see how these people act, to see if there's been a change in their behavior. And there hasn't been. The fact that I have to jump in and be the boogeyman actually should make you really scared. But a lawful public records regime works the same whether the requester is a reporter, a lawyer, a retiree, or a single resident asking for emails about themselves. Because when it doesn't, when the rules flex depending on who's CC'd, the problem's not a misunderstanding, folks. It's the culture. The Attorney General complied because the law required it. The local offices still resist because they can, and they do. Until they can't, until they won't. That's the pattern. Once you see it, you're never going to unsee it, right? The county and the city, they mirror each other perfectly. What should concern people the most is not any single denial, any one lawyer, any one email thread. What should concern people is how seamlessly the city of Lorain and the Lorain County mirror each other in behavior, language, and instinct. These are different offices, different chains of command, different letterhead. Yet, playbook's the same. It's indistinguishable. Same reflexes appear almost every fucking time. Delay first, delay, deflect second. Normalize the delay as reasonable. Reframe the request as burdensome. Subtly shift the entire emotional weight of the interaction so the requester feels like a problem. Then stick the moles on them. The law is rarely denied outright. It's softened, it's bent, it's negotiated, it's treated as if there were guidance instead of a mandate. It's slowly heated up like butter, right? To make that resistance just melt away. What makes it especially dangerous is that it doesn't require conspiracy, right? It just requires culture. Lawyers move between offices, right? We just saw it happen again. Graves, Levesque, all these people, right? It's all the same lawyers. I pointed it out in a lot of my other stories, even more recently, how all these lawyers are controlling everything. Lo and behold, the story circled around a couple of lawyers that I met that thought they could run their yaps about things and break the law. Well, because only one of you refused me my records, balls. Lawyers move between offices. Administrators consult across departments. Outside counsel advises multiple entities, right? You got one guy advising 6 different cities, and that one guy's wrong. That's why we don't let that happen. Checks and fucking balances. But no, y'all want to listen to the Lorain Law Department, and these guys can't even write state law, follow state law. They're still stuck in whatever 1980s culture cross-war they're dealing with. But hey, the culture's still there. The lawyers move. Counsel is advising, language gets recycled, templates get reused, and over time that practice hardens into normal without everyone even formally deciding that transparency should be resisted. You start reading the rules and you're like, wait a minute, none of this is in the rules, but hey, that's how a system trains itself, right? New staff learn not from the statutes, but from observation. They learn from what gets rewarded. They learn from what causes friction. And they learn by being thrown to the wolves. They learn by backing up the same statements that everybody else backs up. Blood in, blood out, right? That was Bulls' blood in. He came down and straight lied to me and said I couldn't have my records, regardless of, well, he didn't lie. He told me the truth. They weren't going to give me the records. And that it's not a lie, it's the truth. And by telling the truth, he broke the law because he had to give me the records and he refused. See how that's how a system trains itself. That's how everyone gets blooded in. But from that observation, they learn what gets rewarded, right? Bull sees the hand that gets rewarded, right? They watch Levesque get promoted to Sheffield, and they watch Graves move, and they watch judges get promoted. They learn the hand that feeds them. And they learn what's going to cause friction. They learn which requests get fast-tracked, which ones get slow-walked, right? They learn the players. They learn the reasonable time is elastic, right? It depends on who's asking and how they're asking and when they're asking and what they're asking for. That still reviewing is safe. That ambiguity favors the institution every time. That specificity favors the requester. That's why I'm always very specific. And that should be very resisted, is what they're thinking. Eventually, no one remembers that it could be done differently. No one remembers that the law is designed to be simple on purpose. I mean, the law literally says they're supposed to help you figure it out. No one remembers that public records are supposed to be boring. I shouldn't be doing fucking any podcast about public records. This should be the most boring, routine, unremarkable shit that anyone ever sees. Obstruction has become procedural. Delays have become neutral. The citizen who insists on compliance are quietly recast as difficult, obsessive, or unreasonable, or in worst case, charged with crimes. And that's the most corrosive part of all of it, the inversion. The person asking for records becomes the irritant. The office failing to comply becomes the professional. The burden shifts without anyone even announcing it shifted. Once that inversion takes hold, it spreads effortlessly. And that's why the city's behavior, the county's behavior look the same, even when the names change. This is where the same phrases appear in different inboxes. This is why the same excuses surface regardless of the subject matter. This is why a resident can predict the next response before it arrives, or at least I can. The culture is doing the work that policy no longer needs to do. It's an unwritten playbook, folks. And this is why the individual good intentions do not fix it. A polite email will not fix it. Me being nice isn't going to fix it. A new hire is not going to fix it. A new talking point doesn't fix it, because the problem is not one bad actor. It's not one bad lawyer. It's a system that's learned how to protect itself from accountability. It's systematically protecting itself while appearing compliant on paper. And that's how transparency goes to die quietly. Not with a single refuser, but with 1,000 small negotiations that slowly teach people to stop asking, right? 1,000 cuts. And that's why I keep saying that this isn't personal, right? I'm not litigating personalities. I'm not psychoanalyzing individuals, right? I'm not asking the audience here to dislike any of these people. In fact, I never have. What I'm doing is documenting behavior, repeated behaviors, consistent behaviors, behaviors that appear across offices, across years, across different names and signatures on the line, across different subject matters. That distinction matters, folks, because when something persists independent of who occupies the seat, the problem isn't the person. It's the system that trained them. In some ways, that's far more serious than individual misconduct. Individual misconduct can be remedied, right? We can fire, we can discipline, we can correct, we can fix. That's what I thought I was. I'm sorry. Ooh, that was kind of loud. That's what I thought I was doing to begin with. Like, I thought I was just correcting a few bad deeds, a few bad apples, right? But it's not. It's systematic. It's hydromatic. Why, it's grease lightning, grease lightning. I'm sorry. Systems adapt. Systems will absorb criticism and convert it into procedure every time. And when the same public records obstacles appear time and time again, whether the email comes from one lawyer or another lawyer, or whether the request goes to the city or the county, whether subject is police emails, council emails, video footage, contracts, sewer contracts, personnel files, lunch orders, something structural is happening, folks. That's why I resist these attempts to personalize this conversation. You know, when people say I'm the problem, you know, no, he's the problem. Yeah, personalization is the release valve, folks. That's how that allows that institution like Lorain City, Lorain County, the state, whoever it is, whoever that person in power is, to say implicitly or explicitly, either or, know the difference, that the issue will resolve itself if the right person leaves retires, transfers, or gets replaced. Or if the public records requester just goes the fuck away. But I've watched new people step into these roles and adopt the same posture almost immediately. I mean, shit. I thought that our sheriff and our prosecutor were going to be different, but no. Same office staffs in the prosecutor's office, the same office staffs in the sheriff's office. Janice Gear was there before, she's there after. Same people, same phrases, same delays. The office holder doesn't change it. Same framing of requests as burdens. The same comfort with saying no first and explaining later. That does not happen organically. That's learned behavior. Training alone will not fix this unless the culture itself changes. Policies alone will not fix this unless there's consequence for ignoring them. New leadership is not going to fix this unless the new leadership is willing to confront the habits that have become normalized. Because right now the system rewards delay. It rewards opacity. It literally rewards patience from the public rather than compliance from the office. And as long as those incentives remain intact, the outcomes are going to remain the same, folks. That's why I keep bringing up this damn conversation back to enforcement. Not punishment for punishment's sake, but accountability that's actually supposed to mean something. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not exist in a bubble. It doesn't exist as a suggestion. It exists as a mandate. And mandates only work when they're treated as non-optional. When process stops being acceptable and starts being, where are the records? When reassurance stops substituting for production, when delay stops being framed as reasonable simply because it's polite. So no, it's not personal, it's systematic. It's hydromatic. Wow, it's grease lightning. Sorry. I insist on saying that out loud because the systems do not change through discomfort alone. They change when people stop letting procedural language obscure substantive failure. They change when patterns are named clearly and repeated until denial is no longer plausible. They change when the public refuses to accept that asking for records should require endurance, escalation, or any insider knowledge. I shouldn't have to make a goddamn book on it for people, for Christ's sakes. Calling this out isn't hostility, it's diagnosis. And it's what I'm supposed to do in fixing and diagnosing systems as a social worker. Because without honest diagnosis, nothing else matters, folks. It all moves upward. That's the point. One of the most important things to understand about this system, how it operates, is that it's not siloed, right? It does not stay local. It doesn't stop at the counter where the clerk says no, or at the inbox where a lawyer sends a denial. It moves upward. Requests escalate. Disputes escalate. Conflicts escalate. And when they do, they almost always land in the same place. Same voices, the same language. At the township level, residents are told they need to redirect their requests. At the city level, they're told legal review is required. At the county level, they're told process must be followed. And then when those lawyers when those layers collapse into one another, when a request becomes inconvenient enough or persistent enough, it funnels upward to the prosecutor's office, usually the county and the township and the county says. Sometimes in the city's case, but the phrasing changes slightly. The tone becomes more formal. The citations get longer, but the posture is still the same. And that's not coincidence, folks. That's a pipeline behavior. That's how institutions insulate themselves. Lower offices deflect upward, higher offices standardize the response, and that's because some people advise multiple entities, and that language travels with them, right? Overly broad, ambiguous, still reviewing, no responsive records, not the custodian, referred to another department. CLEIRs. No. We just don't care. These are not independent judgments being made in isolations. They're rehearsed outcomes of a shared institutional mindset that runs from the city to the township to the county. I'm starting to think all the way up almost to the state level, although the AG's office seems to have it down right. But they're the ones that set the rules. I imagine they'd get it right. And it's not one name that matters, it's continuity. The same interpretive lens, the same risk aversion, the same instinct to narrow obligations instead of fulfill them. When residents in different jurisdictions are dealing with different subject matter, encounter the same resistance patterns, the same legal framing, it tells you the system's working exactly as it was trained to work, right? This is where people misunderstand what's happening. They think that the escalation means resolution, right? They think that if they just get high enough, someone will finally say yes. But in a system like this, escalation often just means refinement. The denial becomes cleaner. The delay becomes better worded. The justification becomes more defensible on paper. The outcome becomes the change. This is why the language matters so much, because language reveals structure. When the same phrases appear at every level, and I love the English language, and I love seeing repeating phrases, repetition of the phrases, it sticks out in my brain. I don't know, whatever we want to call that. There's been studies done on that. But when I read stuff and I read these laws and I see these things and I see these denials, and the denials just aren't my denials, they're denials that are in emails that people are sending me. Same language. It reveals that structure. It means compliance has become conditional. It means the law is treating something to manage rather than something to obey. And the consequence is, if this doesn't change, they're going to be bad. It's not just frustration. It's not just burnout. It's not just a few annoyed requesters venting on social media. The real consequence of this is going to be selective transparency. Records released when they feel safe. Maybe after it's a year and no one can sue them. Records delayed when they're sensitive, right? Records denied when they're inconvenient. Oversight that exists in theory but collapses in practice. When people stop asking because it takes too much time, too much money, too much emotional energy, the system notices that. And when the system notices that resistance works, it hardens around those successes. Transparency will become performative. Accountability will become optional. And the public record stops being a record of governance and starts being, becoming a curated artifact. That's how corruption thrives, not through dramatic acts, but through quiet normalization, through the slow erosion of expectation, through teaching people that asking questions is exhausting and compliance is negotiable. And that no one is watching closely anymore, and power fills the silence. That's why I keep doing this, folks. Not because it's enjoyable, not because it's friggin' easy, not because it makes me popular, but because someone has to keep saying the quiet part out loud. Someone has to keep pointing at the pipeline and saying, instead of arguing with the last person in it, someone has to keep reminding the government that you is not an insult. It's a designation of responsibility. And until that responsibility is treated as non-negotiable, this culture is going to continue to reproduce itself. Plain and simple, folks. You're going to get treated this way eventually. Eventually, unless you're with them, you're against them. That's the way they see you. You're the enemy, and they're supposed to be your representatives protecting you. We're still working on your request, though. That's not a legal status. It's another phrase that shows up consistently is we're still working on your request. It's one of those sentences that feels reasonable until you kind of interrogate it. What does working on it mean? What task is being performed? What remains outstanding? What portion of the request is complete? What portion is delayed? What statutory exemptions being considered? They don't ever say that, even though the law says they're supposed to. They just say we're still working on it. And that's not a legal status. It's a holding pattern, right? The law doesn't recognize holding patterns. The law recognizes your duty. Either records are produced or they're withheld under a specific exemption that must be cited. Everything else is narrative. And the longer this narrative goes on unchallenged, the more uncomfortable it's going to be for us, and the more comfortable the offices are going to get using this as their legal shield. Because most people don't want to, do not want to be that guy, right? Everyone's like, oh, it's that guy. Yeah, I get it. I'm that guy. Yeah, nobody wants to be the asshole. Most people don't want to be seen as impatient. Most people assume that the government says if it's working on it, that it must be true. Here's the uncomfortable truth. If a private citizen treated deadlines this way, there'd be consequences, right? If you ignored a court deadline and said, I'm still working on it, you wouldn't be praised for your effort. They'd throw your bitch ass in jail, right? You'd be sanctioned. Government offices have simply trained themselves to expect more grace than the law affords, and that they afford us. Because redaction is a permanent state of being for these people. Let's talk about redaction. Redaction has become the Swiss Army knife of public records obstruction. Redaction's real. Redaction's necessary. Redaction is lawful when applied properly. What's happened here is redaction has been transformed into a tool of excuse. You can't expect the records because it haven't been redacted yet. That sentence does a lot of work. It frames redaction as a prerequisite to access rather than a concurrent obligation. It implies that inspection is contingent on the office's comfort level, and it subtly shifts the blame into the requester as if the problem is their impatience rather than the office's delay. Ohio law doesn't allow for that. Inspection does not wait for perfection, right? Let's say that again. Inspection does not wait for perfection. Inspection does not wait for perfection. If a record contains exempted material, the material is redacted. The remainder is produced. Redaction is not a reason to withhold an entire record indefinitely. And yet it keeps happening time and time again because redaction proves or provides plausible deniability. It sounds responsible. It sounds careful. It buys time. And the time is currency of, obstruction. I mean, how custodian confusion magically appears is beyond me. Another pattern I observed is the attention what I call custodian confusion, right? One office says, oh, we don't have those records, and suggests another office might. And the office says, oh, we're not the custodian of those records. They are. And around we go. Round and round the mulberry bush, the requester asks for records. Round and round the mulberry bush, pop goes the requester until the requester is exhausted and he's just done, right? The legal reality is the public office that receives the request has a duty to respond, right? If it's not the custodian, it says so clearly and it directs to the requester to the correct office. And they know who the fucking correct office is, right? Doesn't get to play hot potato with responsibility. 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato more, 1 potato, 2 potato, hot potato more. It certainly does not get to remain silent while hoping the requester gives up. Come on, guys. It just doesn't. Custodian confusion is not an accident. It's a symptom of a system that benefits from diffusion because no one owns the obligation. No one feels pressure to comply. And why this language only works on good faith people. Before I start this, I just want to point out, I'm not going to say who says it, but I have someone that I talk to regularly, and they'll know when they hear this. They always talk about, the law requires, and the law was based back in the day off of everyone were people of faith. Good faith, right? You have good faith. You believe in the laws. You believe laws matter for a reason. And you believe that most people are good and that law enforcement's good and they're going to do these things right. And this language is only going to work on people who are good faith people. And in today's day and age, that's not everybody. In fact, that's not even most people. The reason these tactics work is because most people operate in good faith. I mean, they do. They assume politeness means progress. They assume if they're being nice to you, it means we're getting somewhere. They assume professionalism means compliance. They assume delay means workload rather than resistance. And governments know this. They rely on it. People don't assume that you're just doing it to be a dick. The system's not built to stop the most aggressive requesters. It's built to wear down reasonable ones. It's not built to outlast me. It's built to outlast you. And you, 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 and you. Because he loves the word you so much. It's built to outlast patience. It's built to make the cost of persistence feel higher than the value of records. And that's eventually why people stop asking, and that's why they send certain people after me to attack. That's why I keep saying it's structural. It's not accidental. None of this requires a conspiracy to exist. None of it requires malicious intent. All it requires is a shared understanding that delay has no consequence. That vague language is safer than specificity, and that compliance can be negotiated instead of enforced. Because who knows when it's going to be your records that they're looking for. And once that understanding takes hold, it reproduces itself. New staff learn the new language. New lawyers adopt that tone. New offices mirror that behavior. Before long, everyone's just saying the same things, producing the same outcomes, whether or not it's explicitly agreeing to obstruct or not. That's how systems fail without anyone ever admitting any fault. Looks a lot like the Army to me, but those patterns and rules were set down for generations. The only thing that breaks this pattern is insistence. Not anger, not insults, insistence. Insistence on statutory citations from them. Insistence on timelines. Insistence on naming the custodian up front. Insistence on distinguishing between redaction and withholding. Insistence on production instead of reassurance. And that's why the word "you" matters so much here. Because you pens responsibility. You collapses diffusion. You reminds the government that obligations are not abstract, which is exactly what makes people uncomfortable. And as I said earlier, a little discomfort's not a bad thing. It helps challenge our boundaries. It helps make us better people. Because what this does to a community over time, and why it's so hard to undo, is that once a government normalizes delay, deflection, and procedural fog, damage doesn't stay confined to the records office. It spreads outward quietly. It metastasizes into every corner of your civic life. This is the part that people rarely talk about, because it's harder to measure than just a missed deadline or unlawful fee. What breaks first is not access to documents. What breaks first is trust. When residents learn through experience that asking questions leads to stonewalling, they stop asking. When journalists learn that basic records take months, cost hundreds of dollars, or require legal escalation, they start self-censoring what stories they're even worth pursuing, right? When advocates realize that every request will be treated like an adversarial act, we burn out. And then when all of that happens together, what you get is not transparency, you get friction. You get selective visibility. You get a government that knows which questions will be followed through on and which ones will quietly die. They know which ones they can actually putt around. And that's not hypothetical. It's observable behavior. I've watched people abandon requests because they could not afford the fees. I've watched people give up because they did not have time to go chase the emails that never came back. I've watched people decide it was not worth the stress of keep pressing, especially when they were made to feel like they were being unreasonable for insisting on something that the law already guarantees. That's how accountability erodes, folks, not without a single dramatic scandal, right? But because the most effective way to avoid oversight is to refuse outright. I mean, not to refuse outright, but I mean, it's to make the cost of persistence higher than the perceived benefit of the information. And that's why I was always requesting, you request dumb stuff too sometimes. Sometimes reading through dumb stuff tells you a lot, though. I learned that in loss prevention. When I worked in loss prevention, you read through the returns and you just read every return until you find unusual names and you look for patterns. And I would go through months upon months upon months upon months upon months manually of these records looking for name recognition, pattern recognition, which is, again, why I'm so good at this. And I was good at it. And so the more information you can get, the better. The more they can hold from you, the better. Because the more in the dark you are, the easier it is to fucking, grow you like a mushroom. When journalism becomes the game of endurance instead of truth, this culture has hit journalists especially hard, and it does so in ways that the public doesn't always see. Investigative reporting depends on timely access to records. It depends on the ability to verify facts before stories go stale. And it depends on knowing when a statute says prompt, it actually means something, right? When records are delayed for months, stories die, not because they are unimportant, but because the movement passes, right? The vote's already happened. The contract's already been signed. The official has already moved on. And when that becomes routine, journalism stops being about accountability and starts being about commentary after the fact, right? We're not writing history here. It's not the failure of the journalists, it's the failure of the governments. It creates a chilling effect. Editors become hesitant to green light time-insensitive records because the payoff's uncertain. Freelancers can't afford to chase requests indefinitely. Independent journalists, especially local ones, end up subsidizing transparency out of their own time, money, and mental health, which is exactly why the public records laws exist in the first place. They're supposed to keep that playing field level. They're not supposed to make information, less accessible without, and they're not supposed to make information accessible only, with requiring litigation, insider access, or personal sacrifice. When the promise collapses, the press does not become weaker because it lacks courage. It becomes weaker because the system is designed to exhaust it. And that's how that reasonable process became a substitute for, legal compliance. One of the most dangerous shifts became, in a broken transparency culture is the requirement of legal standards of what feels reasonable. Offices start talking about our process instead of the statute. Lawyers start defending timelines instead of outcomes. We haven't redacted it yet. Delays become framed as diligence. Oh, we got to do our due diligence. Obstruction becomes framed as we need to be cautious. The problem with that is the law doesn't allow or say, do what feels reasonable. The law says, do what's required. Once reasonableness replaces legality, accountability becomes subjective. It becomes a matter of opinion rather than obligation. And opinions can always be defended, negotiated, softened, or delayed, right? That's how community ends up arguing about tone instead of compliance, about intent instead of outcome, about workload instead of duty, about conversations that go nowhere because they're not anchored to enforceable standards. That's why people like me keep dragging this shit back into the statute world, right? Not because I enjoy sounding like a rigid asshole, but because rigidity is the only thing that protects rights when convenience becomes a default value. And that's what it is here. These people forgot what it was to be a fucking American. The rights that we have as citizens. Like somewhere along the line, they just lost sight. These guys started being freaking commies and turned this shit into the Leningrad on the lake. I see more socialism going on here than I've seen anywhere in my life lately. Because when, I thought we were in America, not Venezuela, but hey, whatever. When citizens start to self-select out of participation, right? They're like, you know what, fuck it. As long-term as effect on the civic time thinning. People who remain engaged are the only, are the ones with the most time, right? Like me, or the most resources, or the highest tolerance for conflict. Everyone else exits stage left. That is the catastrophic, thing for local democracy, because not just Republicans, Democrats, everyone, voices disappear, and the voices that disappear first are not the loud ones, right? They're the careful ones, the parents, the workers, the retirees, the people who have jobs they want to protect, the people who just want to understand how decisions were being made and concluded that it was not worth the fight. What remains is a distorted feedback loop where officials hear from fewer people, convince themselves that fewer people care, and that the belief becomes self-reinforcing, right? Less transparency leads to less engagement, which is used to justify even less transparency. That's how the governance slowly turns inward, right? They say, show up to the meetings, but they don't want you to show up to the meetings. They do what they do, and it doesn't fix itself without pressure. Cultures like this do not correct themselves ever, right? Not on their own. They stabilize, they adapt, they learn how to appear compliant without being accountable. They learn which words soothe, they learn which questions fade without external pressure. They have no incentive to change. That pressure can come from the courts. That pressure can come from sustained journalism. It can come from organized public insistence. But it doesn't come from being polite or politeness alone. It does not come from patience alone. This is the uncomfortable truth. The system only improves when it's made uncomfortable. That's why moments like the pushback, on the word you that he threw out, exchange mattered so much, because the reveal was the fault line. They showed where discomfort lives, and discomfort is where leverage begins, right? Why naming the problem is part of fixing it, right? Can't until we recognize we have a problem. That's the first step in fixing it, right? Talking about this openly is not shaming anyone. It's not about breaking anyone. It's about breaking the normalization of this type of behavior. It's about not sending a new lawyer down to tell me no, when you know, as an experienced lawyer, you should know that was against the law. It's not about blooding your new guy and making him break the law. It's about making it harder for these behaviors to hide behind professionalism and process. It's about making and reminding everyone involved that the public is watching, that the law exists, and that accountability is not a personal attack. Any more than they would hold us accountable in the eyes of the law. Why do they get mad at us for that? This is what sunlight does, folks. It does not just expose facts. It disrupts bad habits. And habits are what need to change here. Real compliance actually looks like this. It looks and makes people fucking nervous. What's he going to find out next? I mean, the fact that I can request some basic emails and people freak out. One of the quietest tricks that keeps a broken transparency culture alive is the idea that compliance is complicated. It's not. It's burdensome. It's not. That it requires some heroic effort and endless legal review. It doesn't. And layers of administrative process to just hand over an email. It fucking doesn't. This story gets told so often that people start to believe it. Even people inside the government start to believe it. Like Mr. Bowles. Even people inside the government start to believe it, like Mr. Bowles. Even people inside the government start to believe it, like a lawyer, like Mr. Bowles. And once that belief takes hold, delay starts to feel justified rather than suspect. Because we all know once something, I mean, good idea is one thing. Once it becomes a belief, God, good luck changing that shit. So let's strip away that talk about what real compliance actually looks like, because it's not mysterious. It's not difficult. Real compliance starts with simple premise. When the public office receives a records request, someone is immediately responsible for it, not a department, not a process, a person, a named custodian. That person acknowledges the request, either produces the records, produces them in part with lawful redactions, or denies them completely with specific statutory citations. That's it. That's the job. That's the rules. That's the law. Records are electronic. They're produced electronically. And if some records are ready before others, they are ready ones go out first. Redactions required. It happens without stopping inspection or production of the non-exempt material. If something is delayed, the reason is explained with specificity and tied to the actual statutory basis, not a vibe, not a policy, and not someone's fucking preference. Notice what's missing from that description. There's no limbo. There's no we're still reviewing. There's no custodian scavenger hunts. There's no fee roulette. There's no guessing game about timelines. There's no power struggle over language. It's boring. It's predictable. And it terrifies the shit out of systems that rely on discretion. Because once compliance becomes routine, control is going to disappear. And that's why doing it right feels like losing power. You know, if you're doing it right, it's going to feel like a little bit of giving up some power. I don't know, man. Like, here's the part people inside government really want to admit out loud. Delay creates leverage. Uncertainty creates leverage. Process creates leverage. And when records move quietly and predictably, there's nothing to manage, nothing to negotiate, nothing to soften. The public sees what it's entitled to see. That's it. Nothing more, nothing less. But to them, it feels like a loss of control. To these institutions, they've grown so accustomed to deciding when and how information flows, when it's released, who finds it out. This is why you see so much emphasis on tone, framing, and working relationships instead of outcomes. Because when you cannot stop the records from coming out, the only thing left is to manage the emotional terrain around them. Who feels heard? Who feels respected? Who feels corrected? Who feels in their place? That's not transparency. That's performance. And the irony is that the real compliance actually reduces conflict. When people get records promptly, they stop escalating shit. They usually stop asking. They stop arguing when officers are clear about what they have and what they don't have, because we trust them, because that trust slowly starts to build. Oh. Opacity creates dominant, transparency deflates it. I don't think I'm saying that right. Opacity. Anyway. All right, we're going to take one last little quick break. I see we keep bouncing back between 1 and 2 people watching, but we're going to get to the end here. We're close to the end. We'll be finishing up at around the 3-hour mark tonight. I'm going to do one last little quick break and grab another water, and we'll return after these messages from our sponsor.
Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no leash, no polished decoys. Broadcasting without permission. We don't ask. We lift the curtain and we drop the mask. Unplug with Nap. Yeah, we cut through the noise. No script, no.
Hey there, folks. Aaron here at Unplugged with Aaron Knapp. I want to give you a quick reminder for everyone watching that the city of Lorain holds its regular city council meetings on the first and third Monday of every month. And those meetings are not just for council members. They are for residents. If you care about what happens in your city, and if you speak or want to speak on an issue, ask a question, or simply be present and informed, showing up matters. Participation matters. Even sitting in the room and listening matters. You do not need to be an expert on any of this. You do not need permission to care. You do not need to do anything other than just show up. So check the agenda, folks. Mark your calendar. And if something affects your neighborhood, your family, or your future, take a seat, raise your hand, and make your voice part of the record. Lorain City Council, first and third Monday. Your city, your meetings. Those council.
Well, what I was going to say was those council meetings start, I believe, at 6 p.m., which is what the previous one said. So, all right, now we're under our final part of this podcast. Thanks for sticking around for me getting another water. Sunlight is a scary thing, and doing this process has been something of a long one. But the myth that the law is unclear is just another excuse that gets used constantly, that the law is unclear, evolving, or open to interpretation, right? That's one of the most frustrating myths because it's half true in the most misleading way possible. Yes, there are edge cases. There are exemptions that require judgment. Yes, there are complex records that require care, right? Like personal records. But the vast majority of disputes we're talking about here are not edge cases. They're emails. They're reports, they're logs, they're videos, they're records that courts have repeatedly said were public. Claiming uncertainty in that situation is not caution, it's avoidance. Those emails should not have anything redactable when considering that they're not, confidential. When lawyers lean into that uncertainty instead of resolving it, they're not protecting the office. They're eroding its legitimacy because people can tell the difference between genuine complexity and manufactured ambiguity. They're not, they may not know the statute number, but they know when something feels evasive or offensive. And that's why named responsibility changes everything. That's where that word "you" comes back into the picture again, because real compliance requires named responsibility. When someone knows that they are the one who will be asked, why wasn't this produced? Behavior changes. Timelines tighten. Excuses seem to evaporate. Those vague languages get replaced with specific action. Diffused responsibility is the oxygen of obstruction. Named responsibility suffocates it. Now, this is why people get uncomfortable when you collapse the system into a person, right? That language of you. It's why the system language, it's why that language shifts. It's why that tone suddenly becomes the issue, because one responsibility is personal. Delay has consequences. When I start naming people, instead of just sending it to the clerk, I send it to, Janiskura, the sheriff's clerk, or I send it to Becca, the law clerk, or I send it to specifically to certain people, or I CC a bunch of people. There's a reason for that. because it shifts that personal tone. It makes it personal to them because now they are the one. The delay actually has consequences, not just the law department, right? It's lawyer Scott Bull said this. It's clerk, Dole said this. It's legal assistant or secretary Becco said this, or it's Riley said this. That's the reason the law is supposed to work that way, for a reason. How easy would it be to fix this if anyone wanted to is really the part that really sticks in people's throats. None of this requires new laws. None of it requires more funding. None of it requires technological upgrades, consultant reports. It requires leadership saying, we're going to comply promptly. We're going to stop hiding behind bullshit process. We're going to treat public records as a right, not a favor. It requires training staff to say, here's what we have, here's what we don't. Here's what's exempt, and here's when you'll receive the rest. Then actually following through and doing it, right? Got to follow through and do it. It requires the lawyers to advise compliance instead of risk management. It requires administrators to accept that discomfort is part of accountability. And it requires a cultural shift away from control and towards service. None of this is radical. It is literally the job, folks. Why hasn't it happened yet? Because change only comes at the cost of maintaining the status quo. It becomes higher than the cost of reform. Right now, the costs are externalized. Citizens absorb the delay, journalists absorb the expense, advocates absorb the burnout, the institutions remain insulated. Until that equation changes, nothing else will. That's why this pressure will continue to matter. That's why I'm doing late night podcasts. Yeah, sure, it's a 3-hour podcast, but I'm going to set it up. People watch it tomorrow. People are going to continue to watch it. People have stuck with me here tonight. This is why showing and naming these patterns matters. This is why conversations like this one matter. Even when it's late, even when, you have to watch it later, even when you may have to reference it later, they make people uncomfortable, and discomfort is cheaper than collapse. The email language that looks polite and functions like a wall is designed to slow this down and do something governments deeply dislike, which is read their own words back to them and then explain why those words actually do in practice. Not what they sound like they do. Not what they, are styled to suggest, but what they actually functionally accomplish inside the public records process. Because one of the most effective tools of obstruction is not hostility, it's politeness. Polite, professional, carefully worded emails that create the appearance of cooperation while systematically producing delay, confusion, and eventually attrition. You've seen the emails, most people have. They almost always open with the same thing. Good morning. Thank you for your public records request. We appreciate your patience. On the surface, there's nothing objectionable there, right? In fact, it reads like customer service. And that's precisely the problem. Ohio Revised Code 149.43 does not require courtesy. It requires compliance. It doesn't require mandate pleasantries. It doesn't prompt, anything that's sweet and sickeningly sweet. It mandates prompt inspection and production. Courtesy is easy. Courtesy costs nothing. Courtesy can be repeated indefinitely without ever satisfying the statute. So courtesy becomes the substitute for action, right? I mean, it's like I always tell my daughter. She says, I'm sorry. I'm like, don't be sorry. What do I always say, babe? Don't be sorry. Just don't do it. That's it. Don't be sorry. Just don't do it. Like, let's just create a different culture. Instead of having to say, I'm sorry, how about just saying, someone says, good job, because you're always doing the right thing. Courtesy becomes a substitute for action, right? I'm sorry. Oh, we're working on it. We're in receipt of your public records request, and we're gathering responsive documents. Sounds like progress, right? Sounds like work's happening. But legally, it accomplishes absolutely nothing. Receipt is not compliance. Gathering is not production. And unless the sentence is paired with an actual delivery or a concrete timeline, it functions as a holding pattern. We've said we can't use those, right? But that can be extended as long as the office chooses in their mind. Next is where your responsibility truly begins to dissolve. Or where responsibility truly begins to dissolve, right? Your request, they say, has been forwarded to the appropriate department. It's one of the most effective bureaucratic disappearing acts ever devised. Once a request is forwarded, it no longer belongs to anyone in particular. It no longer anchored in a name or a custodian. It no longer is associated with that specific inbox. It's floating, right? Ever notice how that phrase appropriate departments left undefined? They don't say we sent it to this, we sent it to that. Sometimes it's the law department. A lot of times it's undefined. Appropriate department. No office name, no individual identified, no contact information provided, no deadline attached. The request is entered what I like to call the administrative cloud, right? Where nothing is quite anyone's job and everything is, nothing is ever really quite overdue. It's just there. It's in this limbo space. It's not accidental. And Ohio law places the duty on the public office, not on us. Not on a department in the abstract, not on a process, not on an internal routing mechanism. When an office says we forwarded it, what they're really saying is we have unmoored this request from accountability. And unless the requester knows enough to ask follow-up questions, to demand a custodian, to insist on a timeline, to demand anything, the delay becomes self-sustaining. Comes the most dangerous sentence of all, the one that sounds like the most legal, right? The one that most people will accept without even a question. We're reviewing the records for applicability. That sentence should set off alarms every single time you see it, because applicability is not a standard. It does not appear in the Ohio statute. Ohio Revised 149.43 does not say records must be reviewed for applicability, but for inspection. The law is binary. A record is either a public record or it's subject to a specific enumerated exemption. There's no middle fucking category called applicability or uncomfortableness or I didn't mean to send that. That word is not doing a lot of work precisely because it's vague, right? It creates the impression of careful legal analysis while postponing the only decision that actually matters, which is whether an exemption applies. Applicability is a soft word. It sounds thoughtful. It sounds responsible. It sounds like lawyers are protecting everyone involved, right? And in practice, it functions as a delay without a clock. Because how long does applicability review take, right? A day, a week, a month? There's no answer because the term has no statutory anchor. And the longer the review stretches on, the more normalized the delay becomes, right? That's it. This is how silence goes institutionalized. A week passes, a week or more passes, no one panics. 2 weeks pass, feels reasonable. A month passes, now the requester starts to feel awkward following up. And if they are being impatient, as if they're being impatient or unreasonable, right? The psychological pressure shifts. The office is calm, the office is polite, the office is working on it, and the citizens left wondering whether pushing further will actually make them look difficult. Notice that in those two lawyers when they were all, oh, Mr. Knapp. That's the inversion at the heart of this problem. The law places the burden on the government to produce the records promptly. The language quietly transfers that burden to the citizen, to the monitor of the chase, to remind, to escalate. Compliance becomes something that only happens if the requester is persistent enough to enforce it. And most people aren't. Most people aren't going to show up with cameras. Not because they're wrong, but because they have jobs, families, health issues, and limited time. I have some of those things, but I also have persistence. And I'm also, trying to, run a little news thing here. So, support local news. Just a series of professionally worded responses that taken together produce exactly the same outcome as an outright denial. No records, no timeline, no accountability. And unless you slow it down and read the language for what it does rather than how it sounds, it's real easy to miss the wall being built one pleasant sentence at a time. And the problem is that the costs keep, if we keep doing this, the cost is to this work will never appear in a docket entry and never shows up on a budget line, never gets acknowledged by the institutions that generate it. And it matters to talk about that cost honestly, because it explains why so many people eventually stop asking, stop pushing, stop insisting. A transparency system that only works for people willing to absorb these costs indefinitely is not a transparency system at all, folks. It's a pressure filter. It's designed to thin out the herd. It's designed to make you average Joes quit. The first cost is time. That's why I made all those forms for you guys. That's why I made a book, to make it easy. With all the answers, all the questions, all the things they say is listed in those books. Every answer I've ever got. I spent hours on that thing, putting all my knowledge into that little book. It's on my page. You have to click on my www.aaron.unplugged.com and go to the page that says Sunshine Laws, and you'll find it there. You can buy it dirt cheap. If you like my my little page and I'm selling it on, you'll also get a copy of it free if you want. But that's the problem, is that hours spent narrowing language preemptively so it cannot be labeled ambiguous. Hours spent anticipating excuses before they're raised. I've spent hours logging dates, saving screenshots, archiving emails, reconstructing timelines because, I know I'm going to need them for later. It's the time spent rereading Ohio Revised Code and the Attorney General Sunshine Manual and taking the classes, not because the law is unclear, but because, because you're being told implicitly and repeatedly that maybe you're misunderstanding it. That's the time spent showing up in person because emails go unanswered. It's time spent going back and forth and coming back later, 15, 20-minute drive there, 15, 20-minute drive back. Time spent being told records exist, but they can't be inspected, or I need to come down and get them, or I need to do this, or I need to do that. Time spent explaining the law back to people whose job titles presume that knowledge already has been instilled in them. And that time does not come from nowhere. It comes out of work days, it comes out of evenings, it comes out of weekends, it comes out of sleep. It accumulates slowly until the act of asking for public records feels like an unpaid second job that never ends. The second cost is money, not just in obvious ways. Filing fees add up, copy fees appear unexpectedly, flash drive fees get quoted without explanation, gas and parking are real expenses when inspection is required in person, and records that exist electronic, well, not parking, but gas, unless you're going to county. Printing costs are pushed back into the requester, even if the electronic delivery is statutory and default. Sometimes there's added expenses of consulting an attorney, not to litigate, but to simply confirm that you're not being misled. Even when those costs are eventually reduced or withdrawn, the uncertainty itself functions as a deterrent. People hesitate to ask for records when they cannot predict whether the answer will cost $5 or $500. That uncertainty is not neutral, especially not when it comes to body cam footage now. And imagine if we hadn't spent the money on the $100 and some odd $150 to get that body cam footage from Lorain, we'd never know about the Rivera incident right now. And that third cost is always going to come down to emotional. One of the most easily dismissed ones because it doesn't fit neatly into a spreadsheet or pleadings. Being treated like a nuisance for asserting your legal entitlement starts to wear on you. Being spoken to with thin politeness that masks irritation, being corrected on phrasing instead of answered on substance, being made to feel as though you're a second-class citizen or you're asking for favor rather than invoking a statute. Over time, that changes how you see the government and how you see yourself in relation to that government. Here's the part people who have never done this work rarely understand. The stress doesn't primarily come from confrontation. It comes from the fucking bullshit ambiguity. It comes from never knowing whether this request will be answered properly or quietly stalled. It comes from watching deadlines slip without explanation. It comes from constant vigilance required to catch these procedurals sleight of hand before it happens and hardens into a denial or metastasizes into a cancer. It comes from knowing that if you stop tracking, stop following up, stop documenting, the record will simply never arrive and no one will feel obligated to explain why. No one. That kind of stress is not sustainable for most people. It's not meant to be. The system does not rely on explicit refusal to thin out requesters. It relies on exhaustion. It relies on attrition. It relies on the fact that most people cannot afford to keep paying these costs indefinitely. When people finally walk away, the system treats that as resolution rather than failure. And that's the point. If you step back and look at the system without pretending it's accidental, burnout stops looking like an uncomfortable byproduct and starts becoming a design choice, folks. Like the friction's not random, the delays are not incidental, the complexity is not organic. It all functions as a filtering mechanism that quietly decides who gets to participate in oversight and who does not. The people who keep going at it are not representative of the public at large. We're the outliers, people who are enough legal literacy to recognize misdirection, people with schedules flexible enough to absorb repeated delays that come down during the day, people with the temperament to tolerate condescension, conflict, procedural stonewalling, shit talking, people talking down to you, people talking about you like a piece of a crap, people talking about you in their emails and then refusing to give you their emails, people going to your bosses, to your professional societies. All these people are supposed to be your government serving you. Instead, they're fucking you. Everyone else falls away, not because they don't care, but because the cost becomes unsustainable. And that outcome is incredibly convenient for the institutions. When only a small number of people remain, like me, willing to push back, the problem becomes reframed. I'm the problem, right? The issue stops being systematic noncompliance and becomes allegedly a personality flaw. Aaron's an asshole. The conversation shifts from why are the records not being produced to why is this person always upset? Oversight is personalized and pathologized. Pathologized, yeah. Resistance is recast as obsession. This is how power protects itself without ever saying no. It's not a need to deny outright, right? It just needs to make exercising them exhausting. It needs to ensure that compliance requires stamina, time, money, emotional resilience, and that most people can't spare that. And the law remains on the books. The right still exists in theory, but the pathway is just narrowed until basically the most persistent remain. And once resistance is rare, resistance is futile. It becomes easy to marginalize. A handful of names circulate internally. Our reputation forms. Requests from those individuals are scrutinized more heavily, delayed more thoroughly, and framed more unreasonably by the default. The institution no longer sees a citizen asserting the statutory right. It sees a problem to be managed. That's how power reframes resistance. Not by winning the legal argument, but by changing the story, right? And then the people are like, oh, just file a mandamus, right? Look, it's usually delivered with a shrug as if there was no more burdensome than submitting another or sending another email. That framing in itself is part of the problem because it fundamentally misrepresents what a mandamus is. And that's what the costs are and what it means as a statutory right can only be enforced through litigation. Filing a mandamus act is not a casual act. It requires legal literacy most people do not have. It costs me money. It cost me money after the fact that I even argued with a lawyer that said it didn't, but it did. It requires time most people can't spare. It requires the emotional bandwidth to initiate an adversarial process against the very government you're trying to hold accountable. And even when someone does everything correctly, even when the law is clearly on your side, the mandamus does not produce immediate access. It produces a process, briefing schedules, responses, possible motions to dismiss, delays framed as procedure rather than obstruction, months pass, sometimes longer, and that delay alone defeats the core purpose of the public records law. Timely access is not a luxury add-on. At this point, records obtained a year later do not stop unlawful actions. They do not inform public debate in real time. They will not allow residents to intervene before decisions are finalized. They merely document what's already happened after the consequences have already landed, like a history book. Transparency delayed is transparency denied. Transparency delayed is transparency denied. Transparency delayed is transparency denied. Even when a court eventually agrees with you, there's still a deeper structural problem here that rarely gets acknowledged, and that's when litigation becomes a default enforcement mechanism. The right stops being universal. It starts being conditional. Only people with the money, time, stamina, and confidence can go to court and realistically enforce it. Everyone else is told implicitly that their remedy exists only in theory. The law remains intact on paper while access is rationed by capacity. That's not how this is supposed to function. The statute was designed to be self-executing. The obligation to produce records promptly is supposed to fall on the public office, not on the citizen to compel through litigation, right? And mandamus was supposed to be a backstop for extraordinary non-compliance, not a routine prerequisite to access. When government behavior normalizes obstruction to a point that just sue us becomes the unspoken policy, the system's already fucking failed. And notice who benefits from that failure? Institutions with salary counsel, public budgets, and institutional memory can absorb litigation as a cost of doing business. Individual residents cannot. Suggesting mandamus as a solution shifts the burden on enforcement entirely to the public while allowing the government to externalize the cost of its own non-compliance. That's not accountability, that's abdication. So, no, just filing mandamus is not a serious answer. It's a deflection that treats structural failure as personal inconvenience. It ignores the reality of who can afford to litigate and who can't. And it quietly concedes the most dangerous point of all is that the law does not actually work unless someone's willing to fight for it in court. On top of which, the money they're using to fight us in court is our money. That's fucking great. A right that only exists after you sue is no longer a right in any meaningful sense whatsoever. So, what does it do to the people who keep going anyway? Well, there's a myth that the people who pursue public records aggressively somehow get rewarded for it financially or professionally. I don't. That's just false. It actively obscures the real cost of this work. I'm not collecting legal fees on these cases. I'm not walking away with settlements that make it worthwhile. I'm not turning litigation into a revenue stream. I'm coming out owing every time. Court filings cost money. I mean, I got charged $40 the other day just for the pleasure of given the records. And when the legal consultation is necessary, might as well double check the ground that you're standing on is solid. That costs money too. Even when a case is successful, even when the law is vindicated on paper, the ledger does not magically balance. The system is not designed to make enforcement profitable for citizens. It's designed to make enforcement exhausting. And for the people who keep going at it anyway, that cost compounds in ways that are harder to see, but impossible to ignore. You become hyper vigilant. You start reading every email, not just for content, but for what's being avoided. You anticipate evasions before they happen because you've seen the pattern too many times to pretend otherwise. You lose the luxury of assuming good faith because you want to, but not because you want to, but because the experience has trained you to assume that they're doing some bullshit. That vigilance changes how you move through this world. You become sharper. You become more precise. You become to a point where you stop tolerating nonsense, because nonsense is never neutral. And then something predictable happens. The sharpness gets weaponized against you. Your frustration becomes the story instead of the obstruction. Your tone becomes the focus of the delay instead of the delay. Your insistence of compliance becomes the problem instead of the violation itself. And it's not accidental. It's classic deflection. Tone's easier to debate than compliance. Personality is easier to criticize than statutory failure. And once the conversation shifts from what the government did to how you reacted, the original violation fades in the background. That's exactly what the system and those people want, right? And they rely on, on people like me if they have to. If a system's relying on people like me, it's already broken. I want to say that as plainly as possible. A transparency system only works when someone like me as involved is not working. It's failing quietly and selectively. Public record law is not supposed to require specialized knowledge, extreme persistence, a tolerance for conflict. It's supposed to protect ordinary people from acting in ordinary ways. Protect ordinary people acting in ordinary ways, right? Doesn't require an errand. It shouldn't require an errand. If compliance requires expertise, stamina, and the willingness to be labeled difficult, then access is already unequal. They've already fucked it. Unequal access is the opposite of transparency. A right only functions for the most stubborn people is not a right in practice. It's just a test of endurance. The goal should not be to produce heroes or specialists or errands. The goal should be to make it boring. Boring is compliance. Boring compliance is healthy compliance. When records are produced promptly, without drama, without negotiation, without posturing, the system is doing exactly what it's supposed to. Homeostasis. It's operating as it should. That fact alone, the fact that this work feels exceptional in itself is really the evidence of the failure. But I keep doing it anyway. Not because I enjoy it, not because it's easy, and not because I should be the one carrying the load. I keep going because the alternative is normalizing it. Every time someone accepts this unlawful delay and delay becomes precedent in practice, even if it never becomes precedent in law, every time someone shrugs and moves on, the system learns it can just get away with a little bit more next time. Silence is not neutral. Silence teaches. I keep going because someone has to keep saying plainly and without apology, this is not how it's supposed to work. Someone has to keep pointing the pattern instead of the personalities. Someone has to keep insisting that public records are not favors. They're not, something that to be granted. Compliance is not discretionary. Not because I'm special, not because I'm somebody special or great, but because if no one does it, it's never going to get better. Can't be the long-term solution, right? Until then, they're just going to keep trying to say my name out loud. Right? Let me add one my observation here, because at this point it's become impossible not to notice the pattern. And if you don't laugh at it, you're going to start keeping score on a whiteboard like a deranged baseball fan. Until this culture actually changes, there's apparently a shortcut. Not in the statute, not in the Attorney General's manual. It's not taught in any training I'm aware of, but it works almost magically, consistently in Lorain County. At some point in the public records conversation, someone says my name, not aggressively, not as a threat, just, oh, Aaron Knapp is copied, or, oh, Aaron Knapp's been looped in, or my personal favorite, we've consulted with Aaron Knapp on this. And suddenly the tone shifts, right? Emails get answered faster, fees mysteriously shrink, formats become flexible. Records that were suddenly under review now are just available. A sudden sense of urgency, right? In some cases, I will request things that someone else has requested after seeing their requests, and I'll request it separately, not in the chain, and I'll get it before they will. And yet they requested it months before me. Thumb drives will appear. Cops will show up at my house with thumb drives. Morris will show up with thumb drives with all these council people's testimony. I just hand it to me. Chief knows what you're going to do with it. I've had 3 different high-ranking officers at my house. The same records that were apparently trapped in bureaucratic limbo 5 minutes ago managed to find their way to daylight when Aaron gets mentioned. It's like seeing my name unlocks a hidden compliance mode, right? You've unlocked Aaron mode. And let me be clear, because this matters. That's funny, but it's so fucking unhealthy. Compliance should not require a talisman or an Aaron. I shouldn't be, Aaron Christopher, the saint of, patron saint of records. Public records laws do not, does not say produce promptly unless Aaron Knapp is not involved. There should not be a superstition around transparency where invoking one citizen's name becomes or causes the gears to start turning. And I've seen it happen, right? If anything, that should really terrify anyone watching, because that means the system knows how to comply. It just doesn't do it by default. So yes, until it gets fixed, I guess working on this advice, if you're stuck, be installed, or if the fees sound made up, if the redactions never quite get finished, just drop a name like Aaron Knapp into the conversation and watch how quickly everyone discovers their giving spirit. Not because I have special authority, not because I'm important, because visibility changes behavior, and the fact that behavior only changes when someone's watching is the clearest proof that it was never about capacity, confusion, or workload. It's always about choice. That's exactly why this can't be the long-term solution, because the system only works when people who are afraid of who might be copied is not transparent. It's performative. Real transparency is boring. Doesn't look like a name drop. Doesn't require escalation. Does not require personality attached to it at all. The goal is not to make me the boogeyman of public records. The goal is to make me irrelevant. When that day happens, the day my name stops being brought up and speeding things up is the day that the system finally starts working for the way it's supposed to. At some point, it stops being about me and it starts being, clearly, without any false modesty, becomes this is where systems like to love to hide behind personalities. If this conversation ends with, well, Aaron is just really persistent, then everyone listening has been gently misdirected away from the actual problem. Persistence should not be a prerequisite for access, right? It should be irrelevant. It does not condition rights on personality traits. It does not say public records shall be provided promptly, but only to the emotionally durable. Collective accountability does not mean everyone suddenly becomes a public records litigator. It does not mean your neighbor needs to memorize Ohio Revised Code 149.43 or learn how to draft mandamus complaints in their spare time. It does not mean people should have to go grow thick skin, flexible schedules, and a tolerance for being treated like a nuisance or a piece of shit just to see emails their own government wrote about them. In fact, this is the expectation. If it is, then transparency has already failed as a civic function and become a survival sport in Lorain. What collective accountability actually looks like is almost boring in its simplicity, which is exactly why it scares the hell out of the system built on friction. It looks like ordinary people asking ordinary questions and refusing to accept soft, rerouting as the answer. Not yelling, not threatening, just calmly saying, no, that does not answer my request, sorry. And then waiting. It looks like Residents comparing notes over coffee, realizing that they were all told the same thing by different offices, using the same polite phrasing, the same delays, the same vague references to review the process and applicability. It looks like journalists and advocates recognizing patterns instead of treating each other as denial, as a one-off misunderstanding. It looks like city council members and county commissioners being asked publicly and repeatedly why basic compliance seems to require escalation at all. Here's the part that really rattles the machinery, right? It looks like people not internalizing blame for government delay, not assuming that, they asked wrong, not assuming that they were unclear, not assuming they needed to be more patient, more polite, more differential, just understanding collectively that the obligation does not move simply because the government would prefer it to. Because the single strongest thing propping up this entire culture right now is normalization. The quiet belief that this is just somehow how it fucking works. That delays are inevitable, fees are subjective, redaction's a mystical process that takes as long as it takes and must not be questioned, and that the legal review has a black box beyond public understanding. Once that belief cracks, once people start saying out loud, no, this is not normal, the system loses its camouflage. And that's what scares it. A broken system can manage one persistent person, right? It can label them, it can isolate them, it can roll their eyes and say, oh, it's him again. What it cannot manage is a room full of people asking the same fucking question, the same calm question and not going away. What it cannot manage is a collective memory. What it cannot manage is shared recognition. Because once people stop treating delay as an inconvenience and start treating it as a choice, the entire posture changes. At that point, it's no longer about me. It becomes about accountability, about doing the one thing that it always does when it's real, right? It stops being optional. And that's the problem, folks, is that, that's all you hear is the same language over and over and over again. It should be calm, easy, It should just be given out because it's a matter of record. That's it. It shouldn't take 4 months, shouldn't take 3 months. It should be quick. It should be over. And, the problem is that, why people like you, when you use words like you, matters, because people are now taking these things personally. Well, what would you take personally if you were following the law? I just don't get that. If you were following the law, nothing would be taken personal, right? And why it's about the future, guys. It's not about just the present. It's not about whether one request gets filled, one batch of emails finally shows up after months of resistance. It's about direction of local governance. If this behavior is allowed to harden into precedent, because that's what's being trained right now is not compliance, it's expectation. An expectation inside the government that delay is tolerable, and that expectation that resistance will be punished. An expectation that most people will eventually stop asking. And when that expectation takes hold, transparency does not disappear overnight. It becomes performative. Records are released when it's convenient to release them, right? When the optics are favorable, when the audience is watching, or maybe after they've already been elected and you got 4 years to forget. Linger indefinitely in review or processing or coordination. Oversight still exists on paper, but in practice, it's just selective. And that's not transparency at all. That's just curation. And that's the danger here, folks. Not a dramatic scandal, not a single explosive denial, but a slow recalibration of norms where everyone involved starts to believe this simply is how things work. Where's the bar for prompt? It's quietly, lowers. And where inspection becomes conditional, which it's not supposed to be. Where redaction becomes an all-purpose pause button, and it's not supposed to be. Where legal review morphs into a narrow, time-limited task, into an open-ended holding pattern that the public response to is kind of a system is not outrage forever. It's just fatigue. People disengage not because they stop caring. They disengage because the cost of caring keeps rising. They stop asking because asking's been turned into work, and they stop following up because follow-up feels futile. They stop believing that access is real, even when the statute says it is. And that's how accountability erodes without ever anyone announcing its death. The most dangerous part of quiet collapses are the hardest to reverse, guys. There's no single movement that you can point to and say, wow, when it's broken, right? No dramatic vote. No headline grabbing repeal, just a trendy accumulation of friction that teaches people over time that participation is exhausting and oversight's optional. Once that lesson sets in, rebuilding trust is not about fixing one office or replacing one lawyer. It requires undoing a culture that's learned. It can wait people out. That's far harder than complying in the first place. So this is not about records, today, just about. It's about whether tomorrow's residents inherit a government that expects to expand itself or one that expects to be left alone. And that's the choice that's being made right now, folks, one delay at a time. I'm still here. I'm not going anywhere because I can be. And that's the uncomfortable truth about the center of it all here. I'm here because I have learned the law well enough to recognize that when I'm being stalled, because I have the time to document patterns that most people do not have the luxury to track, because I have the stamina to follow up after silence, because I am willing to absorb the cost financially and otherwise that this process quietly imposes. But none of that should be a prerequisite for access. It shouldn't take a certain temperament, certain tolerance for friction, or just a willingness to be labeled difficult just because your government sees, just to see what your government's doing. Public records laws were not written for specialists. It was written for ordinary people. The entire point of the revised code 149.43 is that you should not need insider knowledge, legal training, or unusual persistence to exercise a right. And that's what keeps getting lost. The goal here is not to produce more people like me. The goal is to turn residents into amateur lawyers, right? Or full-time compliance monitors. The goal is to build a system where people like me are unnecessary. A system where records come out promptly because it's the default, not a reward for escalation. A system where fees are predictable, lawful is boring, not moving targeted, designated to test resolve. A system where redaction is routine and narrow, not a strategic delay dressed up as a caution. And a system, where lawyers advise compliance as a first principle and not as a last resort. Visibility will increase. System, where the public does not need a translator, an advocate, or a stress tolerance threshold to exercise a right that already exists on paper. That's not radical. That's not aspirational. This is the baseline the law already sets. The fact I'm still here and on and talking about this for 3 fucking hours plus shows that it's needed. It proves that I'm it proves that it doesn't prove the system works, right? It proves that, I'm an outlier. A transparency regime that only functions when outliers intervene is not functioning at all. It's surviving on borrowed effort. The measure of success is not whether someone like me can eventually force compliance. The measure of success is, whether or not anyone ever has to, And this is just another part of the story that needs to be said plainly, because modesty obscures accountability just as effectively as denial does. Without this work, without my persistence, without the follow-ups, without the refusals to accept no records exist, when they very clearly did, and now an enormous amount of time of what now the public now knows, then Lorain and Lorain County simply wouldn't exist. There would be no documented understanding of the Middlebrooks matter as it unfolded. There would be no exposure on the Antonio Baez unlawfully holding office for almost a year. There'd be no verified record of Rivera's OVI. There'd be no paper trail tying, Riddell and Petticourt together to emails. There'd be no McCann emails showing communications between him and my licensing board, between him and my work, and between him and other officials who later pretended those records never existed at all. There'd never be documented pictures of coordination around CCI radio contracts. There would be no proof of how often records did not exist until suddenly they did. There'd be no thumb drives replacing paper walls. There would be no emails, no attachments, no timelines, no corroboration. There'd just be silence, where now there's facts. And that's not because the information was secret. It's because the information was inconvenient. What people need to understand is this transparency in this system did not happen organically. It happened because offices woke up one day and decided to be open. It happened because someone refused to accept the first answer or the second answer or the fifth answer. It happened because someone kept insisting that the law meant what it said. It happened because someone kept forcing records into existence by demanding that the government honor its obligations. And this is not how it's supposed to work. A functioning transparency system does not rely on a single person to drag facts into the light one request at a time. A functioning system does not require someone to become a full-time translator between statute and practice. A functioning system does not punish persistence by label and aggression. The fact that so much of what we now know only exists because this level of pressure should trouble everyone, regardless of how they feel about me personally. So, thank God. I want some pizza. The final thing I want people to hear here is that if you take nothing else from this long-ass episode, take this. If you've ever felt unreasonable for asking for records, you weren't. If you've ever felt or been told that, to wait without explanation, that wasn't normal. If you've ever been priced out of access, it wasn't an accident. If you've ever been made to feel like your tone mattered more than compliance, that was the point. Sunlight's not a favor, folks. It's a right. And governments do not get to push back on accountability. They only get to meet it or get exposed for avoiding it. That's where this conversation ends for me, for now. But this isn't where it should stop, because only thing more dangerous than a broken transparency system is a public that's learned to expect nothing better. And I refuse to accept that. There's one more thing that has to be said before ending without context would be, false impression that this work is somehow complete. It's not. What's been discussed so far is only a portion of the public records reveal. When they actually are forced into the open, there are numerous other matters that have not yet been touched in detail, not because they are insignificant, because each one requires the same careful documentation, sourcing, verification, and this entire episode's been built on. There are additional cases, additional contracts, additional communications, additional patterns that remain largely invisible to the public because the records have not been assimiled into a coherent narrative. That work is ongoing. It's methodical. And it's very much unfinished. So, we're going to start shifting some of our views over to hopefully to Sheffield Lake and checking out some of the inconsistencies going over there with the paper trails and the lawyers that are there. Anyone who believes these issues described here at the city or county borders is going to be disappointed very quickly. These practices do not respect municipal lines. They travel with people, with policies, and with unchallenged habits. What matters most is which jurisdiction, not which jurisdiction is named next, but that the pattern is named at all. Because once the pattern is visible, it becomes harder to dismiss each new revelation as coincidence or misunderstanding. Each new case does not stand alone. It adds weight. It adds context. It confirms what already has been shown. This is not a conclusion in a traditional sense. It's a marker, a pause before the next section of work begins. The questions aren't going away. The requests are not going away. The expectation that government meets obligations is under the law is not going away. Silence allowed this culture to grow. Attention is what's going to change it. Thank you guys for staying with me all night. If you did, tomorrow when you watch this, rewatch it. I hope you understand this is about accountability and it's about doing the right thing. It's about being an American citizen. So thank you guys for tuning in. This is Aaron Knapp. You guys make it a wonderful night.